15th, 2025. It is 8:32. And Maureen, do you mind starting off with the roll call?
Sure.
Thank you.
Jenna O'Farrell.
Here.
Mohammed Job.
Yeah, and good morning.
Richard Werner.
Here.
Tammy Colby. Gray Fearon.
I'm here.
Tom Lovett. Lyle Jepson.
Here.
Kimberly Gleason.
Here. Good morning.
Caleb Greenwood.
I'm here.
Secretary Saunders.
Here. Good morning.
And Chair Samuelson.
Here, good morning. Thank you. And before we get started, are there any amendments to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, I will turn this to public to be heard. If there are any members of the public who wish to be heard and you're on the Teams platform, you can raise your hand by pressing the hand icon. If you're calling in, it's *5, I believe. I am not seeing anyone. So we will hold this open for a few minutes and I will go on to next things on the agenda. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our December 18th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion?
I would like to move that we approve the December 18th, 2024 meeting minutes.
All right, thank you, Rich. Is there a second?
I'd second that.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving our December 18th, 2024 meeting minutes, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so this takes us to board announcements. So just a couple loose ends. One, we had discussed at our last meeting that there would be a roles and responsibilities committee meeting before today's meeting. That was not, Tammy and I just couldn't get it done between sickness, holidays, family in town, competing schedules. We decided to take it off of today's agenda and we are going to look for a committee meeting in the coming weeks and then have an update for our February agenda. My other announcement is we have one person left to take the ethics training, who I am sure is going to get that done by our February meeting, so I can make the announcement that we are all good. So thank you for everyone who has done it. This has been, it's a good reminder. Having taken it wasn't anything new in there, but it's a good reminder of how to operate. So thank you. Any other board announcements?
Go ahead.
Rich?
Thanks. I want to just run something by, and I'm not sure if this is the right spot, but there's been 3 or 4 meetings in the past, well, quite a few of our meetings. We tend to run way over on time, and sometimes we get into a really robust discussion, I may say, on topics. And what I wanted to suggest, and I don't know if we can do it now, but I think just by unanimous consent, we may be able to just agree to it, is I'd really like to see us be more like we are a fairly large board. We're not a little 2 or 3 member board or even 5 member board. So I was going to suggest that maybe what we could do is I think when somebody's recognized by the chair, that we don't speak until we're recognized, and then we limit our time, to like 3 or 4 minutes, and then that will allow other people to get a word in edgewise, maybe. And then if nobody else wants to speak, we can, go a second time around. But there's been a couple times when there's been a discussion, and I've been trying to say something or ask a question, and the conversation's been pretty taken over, or that, you know, it's been a real back and forth between people. So I didn't know if that was something that's ever been tried before. And I was just going to suggest it. And I was even, because I hate making suggestions that other people have to take care of or carry out, I was even going to be willing to volunteer to, if we want to try it at today's meeting, to whatever we decide for a time, that we would actually be the timekeeper.
Okay. Yeah, and I do know that, I think it's in Robert's rules that there, well, two things. You can set time limits like we do with public comment, but also I do believe in Robert's rules that typically a person isn't called on a second time until every other person who wants to speak has had an opportunity to speak. So that is definitely a little bit more formalized than the way I have been running the meetings. I don't know. What do board members think?
Glad Rich brought that up because that was on my mind too. And having a timekeeper, if you find that helpful, would be probably a good idea.
Okay.
If I could, Jennifer, too, one of the things that I even have trouble with is at town meeting moderating, and even the boards I'm chair of, is, you know, there's sometimes, like, I may say to Lyle, hey, Lyle, what do you think of this idea? You know, when I'm in my time I get to speak, I ask a question, then somebody responds, and then, you know, do we count like a follow-up as their response? And that's why I think the time limit helps a little bit too. And we just need to be able to pay a little more attention. And I think it may help us get more stuff done and hear from everybody on the board. And so if we could try it, maybe I would like to encourage it.
Okay, thanks. Caleb, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that, especially with how people have been having to leave a little bit early recently, I think it's beneficial to try to get to as much of the content possible. If people do have to leave, I think that's just beneficial overall to the board.
Okay, thanks. Any other thoughts on Mohammed, I see your hand is raised.
It's like we're turning this into another discussion, but I'm going to go quickly to say, in addition to Rich's suggestion around timekeeping, I would encourage us to have a facilitator that can gently redirect people around the topic being discussed. And if people tend to go off topic, and you can just say, oh, maybe this can be added onto our next meeting agenda, something like that, in a gentle way.
Okay. So facilitator, beyond me serving in that role, or do you think I need to be more assertive in my role as facilitator?
With this topic, I would encourage that. Just really gently redirecting people to stay on topic and be mindful of the time, and tell them this can be discussed in another meeting or could be added into another meeting agenda if need be.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Lyle, I see your hand is raised. Rich, your hand is raised. Haven't heard from everybody, and I'm happy to go back. Kim, I see your hand is raised, so I'll go to you first.
Jennifer, I think also strategies that I've used in the past is that if the agenda is planned to align with our responsibilities and the agenda is designed with time allotted accordingly, then when items have gone over what was anticipated, I've asked the board if they would wish to extend the time. You can't always, as a chair or agenda planning committee, know exactly what time's going to take. But if the conversation is on topic for the authority that you have and the responsibilities that you have to do the work, then I think it's reasonable to ask the board if they would like to extend the time. And that might help with the going beyond time planned.
Okay.
I do have some comments more broadly, but I think we should close out that topic.
Okay.
They are aligned with governance suggestions, though.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let me go back to Lyle and Rich, and then if there's no other hands raised, then we can, I think, reach a decision on this. So, Lyle?
I just think you're hearing from me that if you would like to be more assertive, and you have that permission, at least from me. So thank you.
Thank you. Rich?
So I was just going to kind of talk to what Kim, Kim and kind of Lyle was saying too. As our chair, you get to say, okay, I think we've had enough, or I'm not hearing anything new. I think I'm going to shut this down. And then if people disagree with you, if a majority of the board disagrees with you, then we can say, okay, Jennifer, I disagree with you, and I'd like to just poll the board, should we continue this, or have we had enough? And if a majority of the board says no, we'd like to continue with that, then that's the will of the board. Because as the chair, we're really here to serve the will of the board.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'm not hearing anyone saying that this is a bad idea. So I think what I'd like to do is, at least for today, and maybe we can reflect at the end of our meeting how it went. But let's propose that board members have 3 minutes to speak. Rich, I will ask you to help keep time, and I will work on facilitating and also making sure that everyone has a chance to speak before we cycle back to people who have already spoken. All right, thanks. Any other board announcements? Kim?
Yeah, with only a couple meetings left, likely, I'm going to circle back to something pretty important, I think, and I think it is well aligned with what Rich mentioned. On this board, different from other either statewide boards I'm on or have led in other arenas, we have not established board norms. We don't have a work calendar. We are not necessarily seeing agendas that align with our statutory responsibilities. There's, I think, probably interesting information on what we'll see today, but I'm not sure what our role is in it. And if that connection isn't made, then it makes it difficult to understand what about the other things that we are responsible for. When are those planned to be addressed by us? We have not done a chair evaluation. That I've done on all the statewide boards I've been on, including those that I've led locally. A meeting evaluation is just good practice. It might help flesh these things to help inform your agenda planning for the next meeting. It might help in manners like this where there is something like this that might have been able to be discussed before. I just think a lot could be managed differently in terms of our board norms and how we address governance on this body, how we adhere to those things that we're responsible for, make sure that those are coming up on a schedule that makes sense. And I think I've probably mentioned all of these things before, but they are both good governance and good practice. And I think they would benefit this board as they have many other boards. I'm happy to provide examples of things like chair evaluation from DPIC, which just literally pulls from statute, to look at the roles and responsibilities and then gives an opportunity to reflect in a development tool like a continuous improvement model, not a gotcha model. And that would be something that in my mind would be better done, in December than with the election of a new chair in March when you have new board members. That doesn't make much sense to me. I know historically also this body met on Mondays so as not to conflict with the legislature. I would love to see that considered, and I'd like to see a legislative committee considered. But those other pieces were governance, and they're related to what Rich was saying, and I think they could be commonly established and would be good practice. Thanks.
Thanks. Jenna?
So I think it's a combination of all the things, right? Kim, I appreciate you raising kind of the concerns and ideas and suggestions that I've made previously. But I think with all those pieces, when you don't have all those strong structures, then we end up in a situation where we're like, oh, maybe it's stronger facilitation or being more assertive or put time limits on people. We end up with rules that feel like they're just trying to maintain and put structure around board members rather than having bigger systems and structures that guide the work and move the work forward. Where 3 minutes might not be enough time for people to have robust conversations and dialogue to help move the work forward. But if we don't have the work plan, then we don't know anyways. I think it's all the things, and I would encourage the board to really look at the both and. And I think just putting it on, Jennifer, your shoulders is like, oh, be more assertive. And like, that's not going to really solve the problem. Because fortunate and unfortunately, like Kim and I are leaving, and the next two that come in may follow the rules or may be confused by the rules of the board. And I think I would just really recommend that the harder lift, the norms and the agenda planning and the thoughtfulness of what comes to the board will really make a difference. And that's where kind of the sweet spot is, and not putting it on the chair's role and responsibility to just maintain law and order at the board meeting.
Okay. And I am cognizant of the fact that this is supposed to be board announcements, and I don't think this discussion really falls under that. I think it's a good discussion to be having, but I just want to acknowledge that. And the thing too is, Jenna, to your point about, it is a both hand. I will agree with that. But I think, it is in Robert's rules to, have these time limits and sort of have a more formalized process with regard to how people speak during meetings. That's not, you guys, this is not going to be a surprise. That's not really my style. I tend to be much more, collaborative and inclusive. But I think to Rich's point, that the danger with that is that if you have it be more open-ended, people who feel more strongly about something are going to end up taking up most of the time speaking about things and potentially excluding other people. So I think, this is just kind of pulling us back to say, that's probably not what we want. And it's not a bad idea to maybe put some more structure on it. And I agree with you. We do need to figure out, how does the State Board of Ed fit into this educational landscape? How do we best serve the children in Vermont? Everyone is looking at this issue. It's not just the State Board of Ed looking at ourselves. I think this is a big topic. So I do feel like we are all suffering from a lack of clarity that I think is probably going to be defined, hopefully in this legislative session. Let me stop there. Kim, I'm going to give you the final word, and then I'm going to circle back to public comment.
Thanks. I've got governance tools that I'll share, and I can do a no reply to all, but share with the board and you, Jennifer. And I think that this is a matter of governance and not waiting to see what the commission says. We have in statute our responsibilities, and I think we should attend to them. And I think if we were doing so in a structured manner around good governance, we wouldn't necessarily be engaged in this conversation to this length. And to Jenna's point, controlling the individual board members isn't necessarily going to address the challenges of thoughtful planning and good governance. And I think that is really something both lacking and really called for, I think, on a body whose responsibilities are as ours are. So I strongly encourage that we not wait for something else, because good governance can work in literally any board, big, small, or otherwise. And I think this board deserves that.
Yeah, and so, with regard to the work plan, the reason I have held off on that, Kim, is because, for instance, it's in statute that we're supposed to create a vision for education in Vermont. We do not have the funds for that. We put that in our estimate that we sent to the governor's office. That would be $200,000. And we don't even have money to hire a consultant right now. So it puts us in a little bit of a funny position. We can put that in a work plan, but we have no resources to support that work. That's what I'm talking about, which may be different than what you're talking about. I agree that we can have, bylaws that exist, but if, for instance, creating a vision, strategic vision for education in Vermont, if that's going to be removed from the board's authority, it doesn't make sense for us to put a work plan around it. But I
I
don't
think
have an
there
answer.
are other things. Yeah, I just think that keeps getting looked at, Jennifer, and that is like not the stop on it. We have other responsibilities. We're supposed to be engaging with local boards. There, like that list does include a vision for public education, but the first thing is engage with local school board members and broader education community, like things that, or reporting on the state of public education, the state of education. Like I will send you the work plan that the Vermont Pension Investment Commission uses. It's got timely targets for when reports that are on big things like our investment assumptions get reviewed. Like that's a whole year's calendar, not a single item that, since it's not something we have budget to do, we're not going to do the other stuff. But I do hear that come up a lot from you, and I don't think that that is a reason not to otherwise be planning. And I'm happy to help in whatever way I can before we leave. But I have a number of tools from other experiences, I'm sure Rich and others do as well, that could probably help inform this, and I think would really benefit this board.
Thanks. Okay, Tammy, I see that you've now joined us. Welcome. I'm going to give you the final comment, and then we do need to move on.
Sorry, construction en route to this morning from school pickup. I just wanted to back to sort of roles and responsibilities. I think it's important to just remind us all, though, that our primary responsibility is with respect to the rules. Most of the rules are now 20 years out of date at best, and the Roles and Responsibilities Committee has identified sort of resources needed to do that. I don't think that there's any reason we can't start coming up with a work plan or a schedule for starting to think about how we start to update those. I agree on the visioning, but I think the field is desperate for the state board or whomever has responsibility for the rules to get these rules updated, because what's in those rules are what govern practice on a day-to-day basis. So I know the Roles and Responsibilities Committee has talked about that. We have a budget for some external resources for council to help us with that. But I do think that as we're starting to think about work planning for 2025, that needs to be our top priority, because it really is, we've gotten to a critical point in the field where people are operating without clear direction on how to interpret statute.
Thanks. All right, so we're going to leave it there for now. I'm going to circle back to public comment one last time. If there are any members of the public who wish to be heard, raise your hand. And I am not seeing anyone. So I'm going to close that out. All right, so this takes us to student report. And I want to acknowledge Jay Nichols for sending me an email right after sometime over the holidays about Gray. But Gray, I'm going to start with you because I think you've got some good news to share.
Well, that's true. That's just about me. But I was selected for what's called the United States Senate Youth Program, which is a really cool program that goes through the VPA and Vermont, but it's a nationwide program. And every state takes 2 high schoolers that are involved in political science, and they go to Washington, D.C. for a week and also receive a $10,000 scholarship. And they meet with senators and usually a Supreme Court justice and often the president. It's a very cool program. I'm really excited to be part of that and to go to that. Yeah, that's just my life. And then things about the school. At Virgins, it's the middle of a lot of indoor track seasons. States, well, my indoor track season, lots of sports seasons. For me, my season's almost done. Indoor track is a super short season. We've got 2 weeks left now before states. But other seasons, compared to basketball, the basketball season will go to March. So it's varying for different people. And then our semester ends this Friday. Yeah, this Friday will be the last day of the semester. So we're wrapping up most classes, and then most people will have all new classes unless they're taking AP classes in the second semester. And then the biggest thing that happened at our school recently was kind of strange. Last week, at the same time, coincidentally, as everything that happened with Power School and all of that mishap that happened nationwide, our school experienced a cyber attack from an international Russian hacker group called 3AM. And our internet and stuff was shut down, and all our information was stolen for like a week. And we got a mysterious ransom note that appeared on one teacher's board that was like a movie style creepy numbers form a person with a hood type of thing. I'm not making that up. It was very strange. That's the FBI was involved in the investigation. That's mostly been dealt with now, but that was obviously a topic of conversation for a while. But luckily our internet's back, and it doesn't seem like they have anything super important or anything like that. So we're pretty much back to running smoothly thanks to our tech team, which actually, all things considered, solved the problem really quickly, because I did not think we would have Wi-Fi again that soon. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't really know what more to tell you about that. I don't know all the details of how that happened or why we were the target of a cyber attack, but it's, yeah, certainly a big topic of discussion. And then the only other thing I can think of, if you want live updates on the school, 15 minutes ago, we had a water main break. So it's been a bad couple of weeks for Virgins, apparently.
Wow.
And because of that, reading through my text right now, I might need to leave in a second to go pick up my sister from school if she can't get a ride. So if I hop off for a moment, that is why. But it won't take very long because I live about 5 minutes from the school. So yeah, that's all the Virgin stuff.
Well, keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Gray. Kim?
Just want to say I'm super excited for you, Gray. What a cool opportunity with your scholarship, and how fortunate for them to have your perspective in those conversations and experiences in DC. It'll be lucky both ways, and I'm glad for you. And then can you tell me the name of the cyber attack? Russian tool yourself? You just said it and I didn't get it, and I'm like, oh my god, now I'm dying to look this up.
They're called the 3 a.m. and I don't know.
I knew it was something interesting.
A series of events related to them, which is why the FBI got involved. They sent us like a link asking us to go to the site on the dark web and give them a certain amount of money in exchange for a code that would end the hack. And the FBI said, don't do that because we know how to get around it. And yeah.
And Gray, were you personally involved with any of this, or are you just kind of hearing this?
No, this is just, I mean, they gave, that's the report as they gave it to the school board this Monday. And yeah, we got kind of vague updates throughout the week because it was hard for them to, to give too much information. They didn't know very much for a while. So it was just, we got an announcement at the beginning of school one day that there was no Wi-Fi, and then an announcement a little later that all teachers need to depower their all their computers and all their Windows stuff. An announcement a little later that we need to be fully offline and don't touch technology or go on your school email for any reason or anything. And then in one math teacher's class is where he discovered the ransom note thing, and that was certainly a photo that was then passed around the school. And then it was only 3 days or something that we didn't have internet. It wasn't very long, and they sent out more emails with information of what was going on and what to expect, and then afterwards they told us more things that they knew.
All right, Lyle.
Yeah, little known fact from Urban Dictionary, 3 a.m. is the witching hour when the devil, demons, and ghosts are at their strongest. Some say if you wake up at that hour, somebody's watching you.
Well, that would be their namesake then.
All right. Thank you, Gray. And congratulations. That really is a terrific accolade. And when do you go to DC? When is that?
It's the first week of March.
Okay. All right. So
yeah,
we can
thank
get
you.
an update at our March meeting. Thanks. All right, Caleb, let me turn it over to you.
Well, I would be lying if I said I had any news that was that exciting. But unfortunately, I am still recovering from COVID, which I caught the beginning of the first week that we came back. So I haven't been in school very much for the past 2 weeks. But our semester is also ending this Friday, so we have finals / midterms depending on what type of classes you're in. I have a midterm for my AP class. But we've had a couple of indoor track records broken in the past couple weeks. We have finally found a couple like qualified and good candidates for our principal position. So that's great. I think we're down to our final 2 candidates right now. Unfortunately, we're still looking for superintendent candidates, but hopefully by the end of the year, we can find a couple people. Basketball is still going strong. We don't have a lot of sports going on during the winter. I think we only have basketball, indoor track. I think snowboarding. I think that's it. But yeah, I'll have all new classes other than my AP classes next semester because of the way our classes are structured. It's like if you don't have an AP class, it'll usually last half the year. Like if you have like an Algebra 2 class, it'll last half the year. But then if you have like an art class, it'll only last like a quarter of the year. So yeah.
What is the timeline for the principal selection? Do you know?
I want to say by the end of next month, but I'm not sure. I know that they have just gotten it down to 2 candidates like last week, so I don't think it'll be too long. I know that they're coming into the school like to do a tour, I think next week, and then they're having an all staff meeting like the next day. So I think it should be by next month. We'll know.
Okay. So students will get to meet with the candidates?
Yeah. Because technically some of like the information in terms of like who they are is confidential up until obviously now that they're coming into the school. So this will be the first time that students are even like really hearing about it fully.
All right. Thank you. Kim.
Thank you. That was partially my question, just to understand the process and to understand if finalists have the opportunity to sort of interact with the school community and the broader community as part of the decision process for the board or whomever makes that decision.
So they have like a separate board that they compiled, which is a mix of community members, staff members, stuff like that, that took in a bunch of applications from people who just wanted to be the principal, like their qualifications, stuff like that. And they had the people on the board compile like a list of questions that they would ask them, like because they would meet with them individually. And then eventually they would just dwindle it down until there was only a couple candidates.
And now that there's just 2 finalists, what happens? It sounds like they're going through the schools.
Yeah, I think they're both gonna tour Lake Region, and I'm not sure what happens after that, honestly.
Okay, but it sounds like at that point, like the school community knows who it is, and probably so too does the broader community.
Yeah,
or
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else for either Caleb or Gray? You're right at time. All right. Well, thank you both. Good luck if you have finals this week. Good luck with that, and it'll be interesting to hear about your classes, your new classes at our next meeting. All right. So with that, I'm going to this takes us to the state of special education. We've been kicking this item around for a few months. It was on our agenda last month. The board ran out of time. So I think we had the speed round with Meg, who has come back today. And I believe she's here with us. So this is Meg Porcella, who is the agency Student Support Services Division Director. So Meg, welcome. I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. I thought that I would start this morning with where Kim Gleason left us when I was here last, and that was around our state determinations by the Office of Special Ed Programs. It fits very well with all the things that I wanted to share and might be helpful for some of the questions, anticipating some of the questions that you may have. But I wanted to just briefly explain how some of this works and what it means that Vermont is categorized as being in needs assistance with the Office of Special Ed Programs that I'm going to call OSEP instead of having to say Office of Special Ed Programs for the next bit of time. What happens is on our annual performance plan, state performance plan annual performance report, which we have given you sort of the Cliff Note version of in the notes, and you had them last year as well. It's, I think, the first item F. That is sort of the way to look at what our SPP APR means as far as the things that we have to report on for the federal government. So when a state scores on the things that we get scored on between 60 and 79%, that identifies that state as being in needs assistance. So for Vermont, we scored in that range on three in three areas. The first area, or the first factor, is that we scored lower than meeting the requirements in increasing or the percentage of students with disabilities that participate in the statewide assessment for grade 8 math and for grade 4 reading and math. And so because we have fewer students than the benchmark participating in those statewide assessments, that score pushed us into needs assistance. Another area is the need to increase graduation rates for students with disabilities while simultaneously decreasing dropout rates. And the third is making sure that that all local education agencies have transition plans out of high school for students with disabilities. So out of secondary education, so that we need a fully compliant transition plan for every senior for just ease of understanding in high school. And that rate, it was low enough to push us into needs assistance. So those are the three areas where Vermont has additional work to do. And we are working on rectifying those issues. Some of them require, and I think we'll get into this, a very comprehensive approach that's not just a special ed program or not just a special ed problem. And then others of them are more of a governance type of structure that would help. But I just wanted to start with that. And I welcome if there are any questions about that specifically, and then I'll sort of launch into the state of the state that we had planned for the past couple of meetings.
Yeah, and I would like to just reinforce that, Meg. I appreciate that framing. Overall, this work is really important at the Agency of Education. In the next presentation, we're going to walk through what we heard through the Listen and Learn tour and how we are prioritizing our work at the agency to really elevate performance and outcomes in key areas. We also have been engaged in our federal monitoring visit, and we've identified a couple of key areas where we need to make improvements. And this is a place where we're seeing really consistent themes from the Listen and Learn tour, from the data analysis, and from feedback that we are receiving from the federal government. So what you will be seeing from the Agency of Education is a real focus on improving our overall accountability, and that includes for students who have an IEP. Also, we're focusing very much on reducing chronic absenteeism and improving graduation rates across the state, and thinking intentionally around how we can promote better coordination and kind of overall system alignment of some of these pieces across government structures. So I just wanted to frame, and because we're going to have the Listen and Learn presentation later, but we're being very focused on these larger areas of improvement as a state and intentional intentional around how do we have a differentiated focus for those students that are also receiving special education services. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Meg to kind of walk through the details.
Thanks, Zoe. So I think, Rich, we are at the point where we can start keeping time. So I have a threshold question, and then depending on that, I might have follow-up questions. So looking at, and I'm on page 7 of, this is the 2024 IDEA B state determination that was in the agenda packet. With regard to, where we receive scores of 0, percent of children with disabilities, in grade 4, how much of that is COVID related, or because I know there's a lag between, when the tests are taken and when the report is generated.
Sure. I think we could probably speculate. I would need to have our data team do some more digging to be specific. I think that it makes sense. We're looking at these are 23 data because we're always a year behind, and this report and I'm not meaning to be snarky about this. Originally, I think we were going to present this in the fall when we had just sort of worked out all of the details. And so now we're working on currently 24's report. So yeah, it would have been, those kids in grade 4 would have been in 2nd grade during COVID, right? And so I think it's plausible.
So, okay, and then my follow-up.
But that was NAEP. I'm sorry, but that's NAEP. So that's the national. I'm thinking that the statewide. That's to Zoe's point, where that's the one that's a little more. Why do we have students who are opting out of our statewide assessments? I think that's another question that is fairly germane. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. And maybe you'll get to this in the second part of the presentation, but it's interesting that the hiccup here is at grade 4. Grade 8,
Yep.
Are fine. So that was making me wonder, how much of this is COVID related, and is this little, bump going to cycle through for the next 4 years, or, is the agency doubling down on, figuring out how to get, by the time these kids are retested again in grade 8, sort
right.
of bumping those numbers up.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that have a laser focus on those particular, but we're looking system wide of improving math and reading scores statewide. And especially making sure that students are taking those statewide assessments.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
What you'll hear too in the Listen and Learn is that we're really being intentional around that data being relevant and useful, and thinking about creating that overall coherence as we are looking at the state assessment data, local assessments, curriculum, to really ensure that the data can be used to inform overall continuous improvement. And so that's a piece of this too, as we are really helping to support and ensure that we're getting input from those students on IEPs that could be helpful input to drive continuous improvement and closing the achievement gap.
Thank you. Let me see. Kim, and then Jenna and Tammy.
Thank you. So my question is, how are these things monitored and tracked for students who are tuitioned on IEPs to private schools?
It's the sending schools, the sending LEAs, so the sending districts' responsibility to keep track of students.
No, I understand where the ultimate responsibility lie. What is the interaction and like mechanically, how does that work?
Oh, you're asking a question that I am very sad to say. I don't know specifically how we make sure we have testing people. Wow, not off to a good start this morning. I need to get back to you on that one. I'm so sorry.
So I think
But
the question
Zoe.
is, Yeah, so just want to make sure I'm clear on your question, Kim. Is your question around how do we as a state ensure that the LEA is doing that appropriate oversight?
Yeah, the LEA doing that appropriate oversight, the private school equipped to actually follow through on that, which is required if they're willing to accept public dollars. What is the AOE doing for that?
Yeah, I take the question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is the question specific to students that are at independent schools taking the state assessment?
Taking the state assessment, increasing grad rates, transition plans when they graduate. Do we not know how that's done?
Okay. I apologize.
So,
I thought you were
Meg,
speaking specifically. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so Meg, step back and talk about the overall monitoring approach and the role of the Agency of Education in overseeing compliance around these critical pieces. And also we are in the process of ramping up support in this area. So there will be a designated special education staff member to support independent schools in that review process. So if you could talk about the current state, Meg, and then also the future state as we're building capacity in this area.
Certainly. So I apologize. I misunderstood the question. I appreciate the clarification. So the special ed team is focused on monitoring local education associations, LEAs, specifically across all of these we call them indicators. So there are throughout the course of the year times at which LEAs are required to submit data sets or specific information to us that we then double check if the LEA's submissions are acceptable, successful, then we move on. If the LEA, for example, has to make sure that if they have 13 students who are leaving high school, that we have 13 transition plans. And if they have fewer than that, then we follow up with either just a request or corrective action. We have a sort of a accelerated sort of scale of support for LEAs that need that. So we have an entire unit in our special ed team whose role it is to ensure that LEAs are complying with these things.
And so when we're approving who gets public tuition from the private schools, they are vetted to be sure they are capable of being a receiving school for a student on an IEP.
Yes, exactly. That's the intention.
Okay, and there's an oversight for that too.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm jumping in, I guess. Meg, thank you for the overview. And
sorry, I meant thank you. I meant thank you. I was taking notes.
I was just jumping in. Thank you for the overview, and I appreciate the breakdown of the 3 areas that need assistance. And I guess my question was around what the improvement plan looks like and the monitoring that you're going to do. And you started to answer some of those questions, which is great. Is there a time? I guess my bigger question is around timelines. How long do you have to show improvement in these areas? And then also, what does a time kind of look like when LEAs are submitting like transition plans or graduation rates, but there's no way to like go back and fix that because students have already graduated or already dropped out, right? Like, so by the time you're getting the data, what mechanism is put in to kind of capture in? Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely makes sense. So one of the things that we're doing now, and this is I think a little bit separate from what Zoe will be talking about later, which will sweep a lot of our accountability and improve. It's the image of rising water sort of lifts all boats kind of thing. But specific for this, we are working with several of our technical assistance centers, and one of them will be in Vermont on the 27th and the 28th for 2 solid days. And those days are when we will be able to get very clear and tight, as Zoe likes to say, about specifically internal or systems that we need to improve to make sure that do we need to change some timeframes within the federal reporting period in order, to your point, to make sure that we can catch students before not having a transition plan becomes a problem.
Hey,
right?
Mike, it's Jill Briggs Campbell. I'm just giving you a call about the long-term weighted ADM. I
Jill,
have
you're on.
time between
Jill.
now and 10, and then the rest of the day is
Someone
a
needs to
bit of a
mute
mess.
Jill.
So if you could give me a call,
Oh, no.
802-595-6361.
There we go. Okay. So that's some internal structures that we will be seeing how on our end we can make improvements to make sure that LEAs are more successful and that students are then supported. And I think that's the biggest. I think your question had multiple parts, but that's the biggest thing we're addressing now is looking at what are our policies and procedures? What do we need to improve upon now? The timeline is, continuous improvement. We wanted everything to be better before we knew we had a problem. So we've been working on these things since we learned of our determination last April, May, and we'll continue to work on making improvements. But those 2 days that we will have our National TA Center partners with us, I think will go a long way to helping us figure out what specific structures, processes, procedures we can be addressing to do better. And then on top of that, what Zoe will be talking about, the results of our Listen and Learn tour, what our strategic planning agency-wide will also be part of this small slice of the education world's improvement.
Thank you. Tammy?
Thanks. I'm curious, in this process that you're going through, both sort of internally and now that you've got the TA experts coming in to help us think through how to make sure our policies and procedures comply with federal rules and statute, and that we're moving on a course to getting ourselves back on the straight and narrow here. I'm curious, sort of, what is the feedback loop that you anticipate back to the state board about changes to rules that are going to be required to do so? For example, I know that we already have indications that we have problems in our rules and that we may be sort of going astray of certain elements of federal law, particularly 34 CFR section 300 with regard to the de minimis educational standards for students with IEPs in independent and private schools where we pay public tuition, right? We are likely in violation of FAPE there under our current rules. So I'm curious, sort of, what's the feedback loop in thinking about the board's work? What's the feedback loop for giving us input back from sort of this review that's going on about how the rules need to be updated and changed to comply with federal law?
I'm going to see if Zoe has some input around the need for rule changes specifically.
I'm not
if she
implying
has
that
any.
you know them now, Meg. I'm just saying, like, I'd like to understand
Yeah.
sort of how that conversation is going to go, right? Because you are receiving the input, we are not, right? And so we have to rely on the agency to, in good faith, to provide us information that's coming back from the federal government in their review and this technical assistance work about the extent to which our rules are complying with federal law and regulation. So I assume I'm making the assumption, and maybe I should ask that question. Are you asking that question in this work? And what would the feedback mechanism be to the state board for regarding adjustments that we need to consider?
I would say overall, we are going to be focusing on special education as part of our strategic plan. That's coming through very clearly as we're looking at feedback from the Listen and Learn Tour, analyzing our data, and also getting feedback from the federal government in terms of our overall monitoring. So one of the pieces of this work is to really look at and evaluate the implementation of Act 173 as well, and really identifying the extent to which we're able to fully implement those best practices as intended within our state law, as well as looking at overall compliance with the federal law, which Meg has identified the key areas where the federal government has indicated that we need to make improvements. What you're referencing has not been flagged in terms of our engagement with the technical assistance team at the federal government. So what you can expect in the coming, actually within probably a week, we will be releasing a report that is an overview of special education. It will walk through an understanding kind of to the general public around the federal laws governing special education. It will share the intent of Act 173 and also reflect on the current phase of our implementation. Through this report, we will be highlighting best practices in terms of ways in which programmatically we also need to be supporting the field to achieve those outcomes. Throughout this process, as we are doing with everything, there will be opportunities for continuous improvement where we need to identify ways in which we may need to change our monitoring practices at an agency, and also the rules and the support that govern that. So you can expect that there'll be an ongoing focus on special education so that we can provide those details back to the board.
Just a quick clarifying question. Are you asking the federal government to review our rules for compliance? And a corollary to that is, have you received any specific feedback from the federal government or in the Listen and Learn Tour about concerns about whether or not our rules comply with federal law?
I wouldn't say
So
that
two
in
questions.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say in our Listen and Learn Tour, there's a specific question around federal compliance, right? That's not kind of the level of detail that we would be getting. As part of our ongoing monitoring with the federal government, they are evaluating the degree to which we implement and comply with those requirements. I mean, that's part of our relationship, as you know, as a state agency with the federal government. So yes, that's inherent in the process.
So we can expect back from you a report after the TA, after this monitoring meeting, that'll give us a list of items that we need to consider with respect to rule updating our existing rules, is what I'm hearing you say.
So we are responding to the findings that we've shared with you and are developing an action plan to address that. As part of our ongoing work as an agency, we are making improvements. Some of those improvements are not based on, they're not about being out of compliance, but about better delivering on our intended outcomes. So the technical assistance will be ongoing as we're engaging in that work. We've had a lot of conversation around the intent of Act 173 and what we were trying to do with that legislation to really improve student outcomes. And there's some programmatic pieces that continue to need support in making that transition. So we are definitely focusing on that to achieve those intended outcomes. So this is part of I think of a much broader scope of work to ensure that we are able to deliver on the high quality programming for our special education students.
I will say, Tammy, just quickly, that I am starting with the rules and the background around rules, and that might help with some of what you're talking about, because I do know that the recent rule changes, although they went into effect in 2022, are part of the state of the state that I'd like to share.
And let me just pause there. Thank you, because Meg, I know that we're moving on to the next part of your presentation. We've got a half an hour left for that, and am I remembering correctly that your presentation is a half an hour?
I think all included. This part with the slides will not take a half an hour. There'll be time for additional conversation.
Okay, Kim, do you want to hold your question?
It was really just a follow up to Tammy's to point to 1300, 2360, and 2200 as rule series that I think it'd be important in your process that the feds review those for compliance with particularly the areas where we are in need of assistance, but I think more broadly. And I am reflecting back to my early days on this board when 1300 and 2360, I was chairing that work. So I think that those are three areas I see importantly that from a regulatory standpoint, we have the Fed's opinion on whether or not they are adequate to meet the standards they're looking for. So I will look forward to that, or you guys can.
Certainly. I do want to say there might be a distinction between out of compliance and adequate to meet needs. I feel like those are two very different things.
I think that
positive that we're not out of compliance.
No, I think in our responsibilities on this body, the State Board of Ed, the review to ensure that as crafted, those rules are adequate to meet what is expected of our responsibility and oversight. I think having regulation reviewed in that context would be important, because this body would be responsible for fixing the problem if they exist. Thanks.
I would caution the board against asserting that the agency is out of compliance in an area that the federal government has not indicated, and there's currently not data to support and engage in that conversation. I hear the questions around ensuring that the rules are appropriate, and I hear the question around, do we recommend any adjustments to the rules? And I think that's a different question. And I just want to be very clear as we're engaging with conversations on the public record about kind of making those statements around compliance or non-compliance. So with that,
I didn't mean to
I'm just saying in general for our conversation, I think we're hearing, I just want to reflect back, we're hearing a question around reviewing if we recommend any adjustments to the rules. That is something that we can work on also with our legal counsel. Emily Simmons is not on the call. And we certainly are very interested in having that technical assistance with the federal government as we look at overall process improvement for our state in this area. So I think Meg, what would be helpful is just kind of itemize these specific questions around components of these rules, and we can loop back with Emily Simmons just to follow up on the question.
I think so. The thing I'm suggesting is that Emily was in those committees, and I think that if we've got federal technical assistance that can review our regulation, like Emily's secondary opinion, her opinion again on stuff that she worked on probably is may not have changed, and that's okay. We may be completely fine with regulation as written, but if we've got technical assistance, I think regulation is guiding what's happening in the field. And I think if the feds can just confirm that we're good to go, that would be great. And then the state board could do their job to figure out, if not, what to do.
My point was more that in the engagement with OSEP, we would have our legal counsel part of that in that conversation. That was my point there. Not that we wouldn't ask for input.
Okay. So Meg, let me turn it back to you for the second part.
Okay. Thank you very much. you seeing all of my screen or just the presentation?
We're seeing all of your screen if you want to go into presentation mode.
I really
Yeah.
do. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry. You know, it's this newfangled technology. I've never used Teams before. I have no idea how it works. Sorry. Okay, let's try this. And now we will go into presentation mode. Is that better?
It's loading right now. Yes.
Okay.
You're on now.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. So originally, when we created this spreadsheet, the need had been to talk about the rule series 2360 and 1300 that were just mentioned, and talk about the special education landscape. And so I wanted just briefly to touch on 2360 and 1300. I do not plan to talk about 2200, which is the independent school rules, but would be happy to come back at another time or have Cassie Santo, our new state director, come back. So basically that's where I just briefly touch on the rule series, especially as it relates to Act 173, to Zoe's point, and then just share our 2023 special education landscape data by the numbers with you. And I will use my mouse, I guess. Okay, so just quick background. As a result of Act 173 and the District Management Group report, the State Board opened the entirety of the 2360 rule series, which resulted in several changes to special education rules. And this is ages 3 through 21. Those rules were, then there was a new special education rule series 1300, which is special education finance, and then updated 2360 that were made effective on July 1st, 2022. And there were 6 key changes that to those rules that the Agency of Education provided really focused training to the field around. And those are represented on the right side. So the key changes came around specific learning disability designation, adverse effect criteria to determine if a student's disability causes an adverse effect, functional skills, goal writing on IEPs, parent input on IEPs, and the definition of special education. There were also changes made to early childhood special education, the first one being LRE, least restrictive environments for children ages 3 through 5 who are not in kindergarten, and the content of an IEP, an individual education plan. For the 1300 series, there was a change in special education funding, and that is the change, obviously, from the reimbursement model to a census block grant. There is a long transition period, and then there's some additional information about the way that Vermont's education fund pays for special education. There are 2 per student grants, and then 2 reimbursement processes available to supervisory unions. So the per student grants are the census block grant and the Early Essential Education Grant, EEE, you might hear folks call it. And the special education per student grant amounts change based on statutory required inflation and student counts. The per student grants typically grow over time. And then the 2 reimbursement options are the extraordinary special education and state place students. And I'll have slides on this a little bit later. So importantly, Vermont had primary reimbursement-based funding prior to the rules being changed. Those were changed because of the results of Act 173. And so it's difficult to compare special education funding because of the amount of time we've been implementing the census block. So the upshot is the cost of special education is continuing to grow, and Zoe will have more to say about this writ large later. The maintenance of effort, or MOE, you might hear it called, has grown at about 6%. And MOE shows district spending and the growth at the state levels around 4%. And the federal IDEA grants to fund Vermont has grown at a rate at 3.5%, which shows our commitment to high quality special education, that we are continuing to fund special education at a rate above what our IDEA grant from the federal government gives to us. Okay, so these are the slides that represent the data that is in that public report on IDEA, and just a few things specifically to highlight. And I also want to make sure that I recognize the invaluable contributions of Brandon Dahl and Cassidy Kanzani of our Data Management and Analysis Division, as well as Katie McCarthy from our early ed team, Cassie Santo and Anna Russo, especially from the special education team. Okay, so by the numbers, and these are 2023 numbers, there were 83,840 students aged 3 through 21 enrolled in public schools. This is not inclusive of all settings because our early education and students that are enrolled in independent schools would not be included in the public school count. However, there are 15,471 students ages 3 through 21 with an IEP, and that does include across all settings because students, whether they are at an independent school or a private pre-K program, are counted in those child count data. 1,365 children ages 3 through 5 not in kindergarten with an IEP, 906 enrolled in an early childhood program. So we can see there's a disparity of children who have an IEP but who are not enrolled in any kind of early childhood program. It's just data. And then the number of students requiring an extraordinary cost reimbursement is 712, and that's of the total 15,471. So those are just some numbers around Vermont's special education landscape. This slide represents the percent of students on an IEP across all grades. And it is interesting maybe to see how the numbers lie. If we were to compare year over year, then we would be able to see the more cohort data, the students who are in first grade in 1 year, what the percentage of students who are still on IEPs in the second year. But we're not showing that. This is just a snapshot of all of the grades. And then
Can I just ask a quick question? I'm sorry,
Certainly.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Can you go back?
No, absolutely.
I'm sorry. What is the denominator here?
So for early childhood special education, we're talking about 1,365.
No, I'm talking about when you say 5.01%. What is that number?
Of the total children who are in kindergarten. Which I don't.
So if you were to average all of these numbers together, I'm doing rough math, it would suggest that we had about 7% of our student population eligible for special education. That is not the case. Can't be. So what is the denominator here?
I believe it's the number of students in each grade, which I'm happy to.
So we're saying the average number of students in kindergarten who have an IEP is 5%. The average number of students in first grade is 5.6%. The average number of students in second grade is 5.99, et cetera, et cetera. But our statewide average, if we were to add up all the students with IEPs in the state and we were to divide them by the total number of students with and without disabilities, our statewide percentage, correct me if I'm wrong, is near 16%, correct?
I'm trying to find
these numbers don't make any sense.
I'm very happy to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure.
I just want to be clear. I just want to know that I'm interpreting the numbers right, because that's why I'm sure that I'm sure somebody calculated them just fine. I'm just unclear from this slide what the denominator is.
Yeah,
and
so
I don't know
what we'll do and as part of a common practice is we will have the open source file. So we'll make that available to you as a follow-up to ensure that you have an understanding of specifically how each of these calculations was derived.
And so you can see my concern, right? Right, like if the statewide percentage of special education is 16%,
I think this is one of those scenarios where we need to be really clear around the student counts and, to your point, what's included in the denominator, so that we are being really consistent around comparing apples to apples. So allow us to follow up and provide the actual data source file and to clarify the denominator for these percentages.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could provide the data source file. Actually, for all of this, I think that would be really helpful to the field. Thank you.
Well, and let me just chime in here because I hear Meg and Zoe talking about special ed, and Tammy, you're talking about IEP, and so there's 504 plans as well. So that I don't know if that's enough to sort of
an IEP is required. 504 plans are different from IEPs, and the definition of a student receiving special education is a student with an IEP. Those terms are interchangeable. Those terms should be interchangeable because that's the federal reporting requirement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That would make the percentage actually higher if you included everyone on 504s.
Yeah.
With the slide before this slide had the numbers of the total students in Vermont and also total number of students on IEPs, right? What percentage of 83,000 is 15,000? Because it's around 15%, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the point that's being made.
Yeah.
So I absolutely do take the point, and the actual data sets are out there. I'll try to put my hands on them, but yeah.
We definitely will provide a follow-up, and we don't need to do kind of an average of averages. We'll actually be able to do the full breakdown so that there's clarity around both the numerator and the denominator as we're looking at this breakdown by grade level. So we can certainly provide that.
And I'm pretty sure these are not averages. These are just the percentages, but the point is made. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Is it okay to go forward?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. So the reason we have this slide here is that we wanted to talk about disability categories because this is the choice behind adverse effect, which is one of the changes that were made to the rules. Every state has a different eligibility requirement and small variances in disability definitions, which is why sometimes we in Vermont find it not super helpful to compare different states to each other, just because it's not an apples to apples comparison. We're interested in analyzing whether how the makeup of disability categories has changed over time, which might provide information about how rule changes for eligibility determinations have impacted some of these specific disability categories. But the percentages over the past 3 years have been fairly consistent. And so this is just a snapshot. So the percent of students on an IEP who are categorized in these different disability categories. And again, we're presenting this simply as informational here. It just information for us to have. So these data come from our SPP APR, and for our preschool environments, 906 students of those total are served in a preschool environment, but the total of children on an IEP in that age age range, is 1,300. So there are several hundred students who have an IEP who are not being served in a public or private school preschool through our universal pre-K program. So the other percentages are receiving services in a different setting, and children are receiving services at home, but home may not be the least restrictive environment. So just commenting on where we are for our pre-K students with IEPs.
Quick question, Meg.
Sure.
I thought that category was for students with IEPs who are identified as homebound or hospitalized. So that would be the least restrictive environment.
It might be, yes.
Okay.
For our preschool outcomes, Vermont uses a child outcome summary, which is a teaching process in which data is collected from the child's ongoing progress and assessments. There's the Teaching Strategies Gold assessment that is done twice a year at all of our universal pre-K programs, family input, and the educator's assessment. And with that data, the team develops a score to indicate where the child is. The score ranges from 1 to 7. And our early childhood special ed IEP has these outcomes embedded within it. So you can see what our state target is and where that falls within our state target. But importantly, the percentage of substantially increased rate of growth from age 3 to 4 or ages 3 to 5. For our kindergarten through 12th grade environments, we broke out the information, the data by the past 3 federal fiscal years. I'm sorry, was there a question?
I don't see
Okay.
one.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just heard, forgive me. So these are the environments. Here are the total numbers. The students served in the regular class for 80% or more of the day has been on the rise, which we want to see. And as well as served inside the regular class, less than 40% of the day is on the decline. You can see the number of students served in separate schools. Here's, I think, what Tammy was referring to, residential facilities and homebound hospital placements as well. There are other educational environments beyond these, but these are the ones that we report. So a little information on extraordinary costs. The extraordinary costs appear perhaps alarming, but it is a small overall percentage of local aid for special education. And there was, yeah, I'll just stop there. But if there are questions about that, we're happy to handle those at the end. Oh, I see 2 questions.
Hi, I just want to clarify here. When you're talking about extraordinary costs, you're talking about extraordinary cost reimbursement program, correct?
Yes.
So what?
I believe.
So in this graph, you're taking total reimbursements out of that program and dividing it by the total number of students with disabilities and not the number of students with disabilities for whom reimbursement is provided, correct? That's how I interpret this graph. And if so, I'd like to make a suggestion that you change that denominator to be the number of students for whom reimbursement was sought. And the reason for that is, is because of the changes in policy, right? It's hard to understand the extent to which that change, that important change in policy that came after 173, where we shifted the cap, right? The reimbursement threshold. We couldn't evaluate based on this graph whether or not that change had any kind of meaningful sort of, I won't want to say impact because we can't say causal here, right? But any kind of sort of loose effect on the number or the average amount of grants paid out of that program. This graph can't answer those questions, and it's really unclear what it is that's going on here when we're dividing total dollars out of the high cost fund by total number of students with disabilities, because not all of those students are eligible for reimbursement from that fund.
Right.
Thank you. I'm assuming that'll also be in the data file you're going to share.
Not only will it be in the data file, but I think Zoe mentioned the report that we're working on.
This is in the this graph is actually in the report. The commission is in the report that the AOE has released, and
correct.
It's a problem.
Just want to say there is a report that Zoe mentioned around special education in Vermont. I think addresses exactly to your point what the extraordinary cost breakdown in a different way, and that will be coming out.
What this graph right now is suggesting is that we are spending $60 million a year. Like I can't. What we don't. Is our high cost program. Last time I did the evaluation for 173, we weren't spending $60 million or even $30 million, right? Like, are we saying that since 173, can you go back to that graph, please?
Oh, sorry. I wanted to look at my comments and I hit the wrong one.
Are you saying that in school year 2022-23, we now spend more than $70 million on our high cost reimbursement program? Like, that doesn't make any. I mean, if that's the case, that's a shocking policy finding that we should be talking about. That means that increasingly so, districts are relying on this supplemental reimbursement program for funding high cost, high need students. So that's one thing. It also means that on average, the share of students, the number of students, not share. Well, I don't know about share because your denominator, I can't tell from your denominators, that the number of students that where we are spending more than $60,000 a year must have increased dramatically. And those are really important findings that we should be talking about. And nobody can suss that out from this graph. So I think it would be really helpful to have the underlying data for this and possibly even to have the agency revisit what are the axes in this graph and what they mean and possibly the numbers, because if we're really spending more than $70 million a year for our high cost program, that's a big deal.
We will certainly provide additional data on this. Your question around denominators may not be as well served on this graph. This is representing the total extraordinary cost for that reimbursement program, and we are seeing an increase.
Yeah, but it's divided across all students with IEPs, not the students who are eligible for reimbursement.
So we can, say that again, just to make sure I'm following what your
denominator is the total number of students with disabilities on an IEP, right?
This is not, this is presenting the overall spending.
This is extraordinary. So is this your extraordinary cost or is this excess cost?
The extraordinary cost that's reimbursed above.
Right. And your denominator is the total number of students with disabilities in IEP statewide, not the total number of students who are eligible for reimbursement from the program. So as your number of students have gone up or changed, it is affecting your per student amount here in ways that are uninterpretable.
Yeah, so this is an aggregate, right? So this is looking at statewide budget and what the actual amount is for the extraordinary cost. What you're asking for is a further breakdown that's looking at how this compares per pupil for those that are identified for special ed and those that are eligible for reimbursement. This is an overview. This is only looking at when we
I understand.
yeah.
So what so that's why I asked.
Breaking that down further is helpful, but that's not what this is attempting to present. This is attempting to present just the overall amount that's part of the extraordinary cost within the statewide program. We hear the request, and I think it is a good one, to do a further breakdown where we're analyzing what that expenditure actually looks like per pupil, all students, special education students, and those that are eligible for the program.
Okay.
Lyle, and then let's go back to Meg because we are at the 10 o'clock mark.
And that's what I was going to point out. I think we're going to creep into Zoe's spot here, but I agree with what Tammy's suggesting is that number may be confusing folks because I started to divide the denominator into the numerator and it wasn't making any sense for me. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So we'll clarify. I think the point here is as we look at our overall, how we're funding education, there's that big picture question. And then what the questions you're asking are related to how does that actually break down when we're looking at the per pupil cost for those that are in special ed and eligible for the extraordinary expenditures. And it's interesting to look at those by regional patterns as well, right? That this particular chart is not intending to do that. It's looking only at overall spend as we look at statewide. But I value the questions, and I think there's further analysis that could be really helpful in us really evaluating evaluating policy and potential future considerations.
Okay, and I am almost finished with this part. While we're talking about extraordinary costs, I do want to say regarding this slide, starting in fiscal year 25, we will be able to disaggregate each of these four categories: tuition, transportation, related services, equipment, and other instruction, into school program or in-state, out of state. So we'll be able to disaggregate this a little bit more and learn more about the story behind the numbers. We'll also have two additional fields to collect the non-tuition agreed upon costs for independent schools. So this is just a breakdown of those extraordinary costs change over years from 21 through 23. So tuition costs could be a public school, independent residential program, in-state, out-of-state. If it is a public school, it only includes the portion of the tuition related to eligible costs, which are indicated on the bill. So there's some other caveats around this. Equipment examples might be sound field systems, iPads, other kind of communication devices. And related services could include, but aren't necessarily limited to, speech language services, occupational or physical therapy, additional evaluations, counseling, audiology, interpreters, those types of things. Tammy.
I'm glad you're going to dig into tuition a little further because I think that it is curious that between 21-22 and 22-23, we saw a 29.8% increase in average. One of the challenges we have here, right, is that your numbers down here in your chart, in your table, I'm assuming there should be a zero out there, right? I assume this isn't that's on a decimal, right? That's not an average per student number. It's supposed to be a total.
I believe so, yes.
Right. So we've seen about a 29% increase, actually almost 29.8% increase in total spending on tuition coming out of the extraordinary cost reimbursement program.
Correct.
That's pretty amazing why it is. And so I'm glad to hear you're going to dig into that a little bit more to understand why it is that we saw such a 30% increase here.
Yeah, so
Indeed.
again, this is looking at aggregate. We're not doing the analysis in this slide around the per pupil spending. And
That was my question because these totals
these are
down
just
here
aggregate.
dropped
This is looking, statewide expenditure. That's what we're pulling in these numbers. And also, it's important to note that there was an adjustment with the formula for the eligible reimbursements. So the reimbursements threshold is higher with Act 173.
So that's what makes it particularly interesting that you see an increase, such a sharp increase in reimbursements from the Extraordinary Cost Fund. And I think it's particularly interesting that it seems as if, and I'll be curious to see the data file when you give it to me, why that this increase seems to be driven by tuition, right? Because again, this table that you have down here, like after the 31,88476, I assume there's another number that needs to be there. That's not a decimal. My eyes aren't very good. That's a comma, not a decimal, correct? You're missing numbers.
It is
in
a
tables.
comma. It is a comma.
Yeah, so you're missing numbers in your table. So I think the increase that I calculated is based on rounding and not the precise numbers. So it's probably more along the lines of 29 to 30%.
I think it's going to be helpful for us to dig in and make sure that there's clear understanding of what's generating these increases. I mean, I think simply put, we know that, some tuition rates will be upwards of over $100,000, right? So we know that. And so those are things that we can pull in when we're talking about the range.
No, of course. But, if we moved the marker, right, we increased the threshold. That was one of the things we did in 173. So we increased the threshold. So I'm curious, right, why it is between 21-22 and 22-23, we're seeing an almost 30% increase in reimbursements for tuition. So I'll be interested to see sort of the further analysis on that. Because as you know, payments for tuition suggests that students are being placed out of district, which if you go back to some of the feedback that we've gotten from OSEP around placement and LRE, placement out of district is oftentimes an indicator that students are not placed in the most least restrictive environment.
So we saw in the data that Meg has shared, I mean, I think it was over 5% of our students are in a separate school. That is above average when we compare ourselves to other states.
It is.
So that is a factor that we need to be considering as we're looking at our overall special education delivery statewide.
Correct. Yeah.
Let me pause. Lyle just popped in the chat, wondering if we should move on because we're over time. And Rich, I see you have your hand raised as well.
No, it was just that we're over time and we've had our time limit on that topic.
Okay. So let me just ask, because Meg,
So if I could get to the next slide, I think, and then I'd be happy to stop. But I think the next slide is something worth mentioning. And then I'll turn it over to, I think, fortunately, Zoe's will sort of touch on some of this, and you have all of the data, and we'll be happy to send the actual data files as well, as we've indicated.
Great, thank you.
So the last thing that we want to talk about is special education and full-time equivalency. So the data above, the data you're looking at shows kindergarten through, or special educators in kindergarten through for students age 21. And there has been a decrease in professionally licensed special educators working in Vermont. There's been an overall increase in the position statewide. At the same time, and this is, I think, important, there are licensing data from May 2023 shows that there were over 2,400 individuals holding a professional special educator license, which is nearly twice as many than we have positions for. So these educators might be retired, they might have moved, they might be working in other educational areas, but we think it's important data point that sometimes we frame the urgency around staffing is that there just aren't enough special educators in Vermont. And what we're seeing is that that may not be the case. They may be out there, but they're choosing not to work in education. And so the data indicates that looking at the why and what needs to change to promote retention is important to examination of staffing. And I know that that's something that Zoe will pick that thread. Pick up that thread.
Thank you. And thank you for your flexibility in coming back and
yeah. No worries.
And
that really was my last slide. The very last slide was another one around education personnel, but it sort of repeats what I just said. So I really did make through it all.
Terrific. I think this was really helpful, and I think with the questions looking for clarifying information, if we can have a follow-up. You have a report due this month, am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, the SPP APR is in review internally.
Okay. So, but at some point, you can come back to the board with, whether by email or if you want to have another conversation with the board, just to follow up on the questions that have been raised.
Happily.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this takes us to the listen and learn with the State Board of Education. So this was a suggestion that I think was brought up at our November meeting. In our monthly meeting last month, the board decided to schedule this discussion for today's meeting. As Zoe will tell you, and I'm sure you guys have all seen in the agenda packet, the Listen and Learn tour is now concluded. So you've got the full report in the agenda packet, as well as a video and slideshow presentation with sort of high-level overviews. So Zoe, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
So I'll just begin by making sure I'm clear on the time, because I know that the board is being very focused on the staying within the allotted time. How much time do I have for this presentation?
You're on mute, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just realized that. So we had put down 45 minutes for this, but that includes a 15-minute break. So I guess board members, what I would propose is maybe let's do 40 minutes with a 5-minute break. Or
okay.
Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Okay. That sounds great. So what I'll do is I'll walk through the presentation. I'll aim to get through the presentation in about 15 to 20 minutes and then open it up for a conversation. And so I'm really, I think as you're listening to what we learned, it would be good for you to reflect on how the State Board of Education defines student success, and also what are the conditions that are needed to ensure that every child across the state gets those opportunities to be successful in school. And then there are broader conversations that we'll have around budget. So basically, as you're walking through and I'm sharing what we've asked the community for feedback, we'll be asking you for feedback as well. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just... Okay, perfect. So the agenda for today, I'll just share why the Agency of Education embarked on the Listen and Learn tour, what we heard as we traveled all across the state, and then what's next. So as I said from the beginning, and Jennifer actually mentioned at one of the commission meetings, when I was a candidate for this role, I had an idea for a Listen and Learn tour. And I thought it was really critical as a new leader to the state that I really ground, my leadership of the agency in a deep understanding of communities across Vermont and what was really important to Vermonters about their education system. It was clear, too, that there was a need for that. This was a critical point at the state of Vermont's history of really beginning to identify how we need to make changes to promote educational opportunities across the state. When I came into the role, it was really evident that this Listen and Learn tour needed to evolve and needed to be more than me as a new leader getting acquainted with Vermont, but bringing in the entire agency to really learn and understand the educational priorities and needs and aspirations of our schools and educators and community members across the state of Vermont. We approached this work with 3 guiding principles. We really wanted to listen to understand how we as an agency could promote equity, educational quality, and the sustainability of our system. We felt really strongly that hearing from Vermonters was important to getting that right. As we articulated across our travels, we identified very key objectives. Through this work, we are intentionally aligning the agency's support to the regional priorities and needs of communities across Vermont. We are working collectively to identify a shared vision for the future of education in Vermont so that we can develop a strategic plan that both meets the immediate needs and positions us to support the future goals that we all share. Through this process, we sought to learn about what's really working well across the state and how can we help to elevate and scale those practices to ensure that there's greater access to high quality educational opportunities for all students across the state. And in that process, we really brought data to the conversation to identify levers for improving student achievement. Overall, this work has provided us with really valuable perspectives around how we as an agency can best support the field. Also emergent through this work was some really important insights and finding to support the work of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. As a member of the Commission on the Future of Public Education, I've brought forward our learning as we've engaged in this effort, and it's really been helpful to engage in that two-way conversation with the Commission to be responsive to what we're hearing, our needs and priorities of communities. We structured the Listen and Learn tour in 3 phases. Phase 1 was designed to do data reporting and analysis. This was when we first published the State Education Profile Report. And we also worked really closely with our superintendents to get their input on how we could best structure the Listen and Learn tour in a way that was going to support meaningful engagement. It was also an opportunity for us to work with superintendents to identify what some of the challenges are in their community, or what are some of the things that we want to focus on as we go through the Listen and Learn. Phase 2 of our process was focused on regional planning, and we hosted 6 different sessions across the state. This involved over 250 education leaders, including superintendents and principals and special education directors, curriculum directors, and school board members to really understand how should we define student success? What are the strengths? What are the barriers for our ability to do that? And what was really interesting in this process is that we did highlight some regional nuances, but we also identified some very consistent themes across the state. And that's helping us as an agency to really refine our focus and priorities. Phase 2 of the Listen and Learn was also intentionally designed to be a data validation process. We've signaled very early on that the agency is committed to improving our data infrastructure, improving our data reporting, and we're bringing together a lot of disparate data collections that historically have not been analyzed in concert together. We feel like it's really important to bring that to bear so that we have a comprehensive understanding of our education ecosystem. And so in Phase 2, we worked really diligently with our education leaders and data managers to address long-standing issues. We certainly identified that there's been inconsistent coding throughout, district by district, and also that there were some challenges as we're kind of combining different data sets. So with our commitment to data quality and improvement, we worked to make some corrections and also expand our analysis, and we re-released the State Education Profile Report. That report has expanded context and description and also additional detailed analysis based on input that we were getting through Phase 2. Phase 3 of our Listen and Learn tour was engaging the entire public. We hosted several both in-person and virtual engagement sessions. I'll share momentarily who was involved in those sessions. And then we hosted educator focus groups and student focus groups. So we're really pleased about getting a diversity of stakeholder engagement throughout this process. By the numbers, so this is really exciting to see. Over a 4-month time period, we conducted 6 regional planning sessions, 13 educator focus groups, 12 public engagement sessions, and 8 student focus groups. This is an overview of the number of people that participated in the Listen and Learn. In total, we engaged with over 1,000 Vermonters all across the state, and we had great perspectives that were shared by education leaders and educators and members of the public, along with students. I really want to thank everyone who came out to support this process. We were really learned a tremendous amount, and you'll see in the education profile report, it's pretty lengthy. And the reason we did that is we wanted to make sure that we were fully capturing the ideas and suggestions and concerns that were coming out through our conversations. As part of our approach, we wanted to make sure that we were really regionally representative. So this map is showing you everywhere that we went to across the state. The yellow dot is representing those locations where we hosted regional planning. The pink star is representing where we hosted educator and public engagement sessions. So just as a point of operations, we hosted the educator focus group right before the public engagement session. So those occurred at the same location. And then the orange stars representing the student focus groups. And where you see the blue stars, where we hosted multiple different types of sessions. And we want to thank all of our partners who hosted these events. We had a great participation from schools and community organizations who invited in members of the public and other educators to engage in this thoughtful discussion. So as I mentioned, we approach this regionally, and we can talk about some of those more regional nuances. But I think what was really powerful is we saw some very consistent themes coming out of the discussions. So overall, when we think about how do we support, we had conversations around how do we support, statewide educational opportunities for every student. And it was clear that it's needed for us to strike a balance between unity and freedom. And we'll talk about how that came about in terms of discussions both with educators and community members. And that'll be an overarching theme as we develop the agency strategic plan, and being really clear on where we need to have unity, the agency investing a lot of resources and time and support to achieving with fidelity those outcomes. And areas where we want to have more freedom, it's really allowing for that localized customization, and those are opportunities to bubble up innovation. Second, we heard a strong call to focus on equity. This was playing out in very concrete conversations around the ability to offer educational opportunities for all students in the state. We heard, because of budget constraints, that many of our schools were not able to offer the array of programs and courses and electives that students want and parents want, just because of some of those limitations with funding. And so there was a real call to think about equity in that context, and also thinking about developing schools that are inclusive and supportive, where every child feels that they belong. In our conversations with Vermonters, we asked, how do you define student success? And it was really clear that Vermonters believe in a holistic definition of student success. We certainly heard that it was important to evaluate students' proficiency in key content areas, that we want to make sure every student is able to read and have fluency in math. But we also heard broader themes around bringing in some of the more social emotional learning metrics to understand a holistic definition of student success. As you've heard in our, as I mentioned during Meg's presentation, a lot of the conversation did focus around needing additional support and services for our growing special education population, and a conversation around kind of a higher acuity of needs. And lastly, we heard that our districts and schools are facing really complex challenges, and that there's a need for greater state level leadership and partnership to address more of those systemic issues. And as for the Agency of Education, we went to these conversations with a real openness to hear about what was working and what was not working. And we certainly identified ways in which we can strengthen our support to the field, and we're actively addressing that in the short term and thinking about that too as we're developing our longer term strategic plan. So I'll start by sharing what we heard through the regional planning sessions. We organized these according to the regional superintendents associations and focused on the Champlain Valley, Winooski, Northeast Kingdom, Southeast, and the Southwest regions. Within the report, the full report, you'll see in the appendix that we were able to capture regional profiles. When we engaged in these sessions, we first started with an overview of the data and calling out some regional trends, and then we asked for input to really define the profile of that community, because we know that data alone doesn't tell the whole story, but we wanted to get more of the qualitative themes that really establish the unique identity for these regions. And so what we were able to capture are the unique assets for each of these regions, the specific challenges, some of the demographic changes, industry trends, to really get a full picture of the community dynamics that we know are impacting schools as well. Thereafter, we broke up into we had breakout sessions. The one was focused on academic performance and accountability. And you're going to hear this first theme throughout all the sessions, but there's a real need for reliable, transparent, and easy to understand data. As it relates to our assessment data specifically, there was a call to have more timely release of that information to inform continuous improvement. While schools do have access to this data immediately, there is a value in being able to publish the overall findings earlier on so that it can support in terms of planning around what are comparative analysis and helping to identify similar schools that are really effective in meeting their goals. We heard very consistently a need for greater alignment across curriculum, proficiency-based learning, local assessments, and state assessments. In our conversation, there was a lot of discussion around there are many disconnects in this area, and that if we work really intentionally to create greater coherence, it will help empower and equip educators to do data-driven instructional planning and overall budgeting to support the needs of students. So we talked about the need for holistic measures of student success. So some of the ideas that came through in this conversation were really being able to measure things like chronic absenteeism, but also future-ready skills that are more difficult to quantify. We heard pretty consistently a need for greater direction and centralized support from the agency to improve statewide outcomes while still honoring the local autonomy. So I think what you're hearing in the call out, the quote below, is that, when we're asking districts to develop all of this work from scratch, it creates it's a time drain. It creates a lot of extra effort. And so there's a role for the state to play in supporting that. And really freeing up the time for then the districts to focus on the creative work about customizing to meet the needs of their specific community. And so we're being very intentional around the agency striking that right balance. And so we've been using the framework around, what are we tight on and what are we loose on? The things that we're tight on are, really important to drive academic outcomes across the state and to ensure equity. And in those areas, we're looking to provide tighter direction and support. The other breakout session was focused on college and career readiness. We heard very consistently a desire to expand student access to flexible pathways. There was a recommendation to develop regional comprehensive high schools that combine the traditional and career and technical educational offerings in one setting. We also were hearing that career and technical education is a way to promote increased student engagement. We see that also with our graduation rate data. We see higher graduation rates for those students that are in a career and technical education cohort. And so again, this really goes back to making sure that our learning is meaningful and applicable to students. And there was a call to really think about how we can expand those opportunities. In this conversation, we were able to identify a number number of barriers to expanding access. Funding often is a barrier, along with transportation, different calendars, and some other operational considerations that place barriers on being able to access these pathways. Something else that we talked about in terms of a barrier is early exposure. And so I know the state board shares a real commitment to career and technical education. And I think you'd be heartened to hear that many Vermonters do as well. And they were talking a lot about earlier exposure. How do we help middle school students understand the opportunities and the pathways that they can pursue? The next breakout session was focused on mental health care costs and systems of support. So we've heard consistently that there's a higher acuity need for mental health support for our students, and that our schools are doing more than just providing instruction. They're also meeting the overall social and emotional needs of their student population and supporting families and connecting families to community resources. This has been a big topic of conversation over the last several months, and there's been a request to be able to quantify the cost of mental health on districts. So when we went into these sessions, we really had two main objectives. One, we were looking to really explore a new methodology to quantify the cost on districts to providing mental health support. And the second area was really getting a broader understanding of some of the specific needs and the challenges to addressing the system of support. In terms of methodology, and I think we've shared this previously with the state board, we got a lot of feedback on the proposed methodology, and there were some things that we really came to that we can't come to a very precise quantifiable measure at this time of the mental health cost, although we do have a proxy. And a lot of that's due to the way we do our chart of accounts. And so, as we think future focused on being able to best support these needs, there's some opportunity for us to revise the way that we're coding and classifying these services to ensure that we have a better understanding of the overall cost and what the needs are to support from a statewide resource perspective. In terms of broader themes, we are seeing that younger students are often entering unprepared. We're hearing a lot from our education leaders and educators that these younger students are displaying dysregulation behavior. They also called out the need and the importance of having early childhood education to supporting these students being ready to enter school and kindergarten. Across the board, we've heard challenges of staffing shortages, and this was very true when we speak about mental health care professionals as well. And there was a broader discussion around creating school and community partnerships, and for the state to think about regional solutions that reduce cost and developing a very intentional continuum of service to support the overall needs of students and families. And I can share that the Agency of Education is working with our sister agencies in this respect as well, as we know that these are kind of broader systemic issues, and that often the challenges and the needs that schools are facing are very reflective of the larger challenges that our communities face. We had a session specific for school board members that focused on the data and really asking questions around what data school boards need to make budgeting decisions and to really make recommendations around policy at their local level. We heard again the need consistent, reliable data to support budgeting decisions. As we reflected on the state assessment data, the boards expressed some concerns with data suppression. So for the benefit of the boards, many of our schools were not able to publicly release their data because they're too small and we need to comply with FERPA regulations. And boards were asking for more comparative data so that they could really do benchmarking to understand how their schools were performing relative to other schools, both within their district, but also across the state. We heard a call for more timely data, and we are really actively working on that and accelerating our reporting as an agency to make sure that that information and data are relevant. So we heard another call for more resources to learn about the budget. It's very clear that there's a lot of focus, a lot of questions around our budgeting process. It's very confusing. It's very hard to understand. And so school board members are often placed in a position of having to educate the community about our education funding system and the budgeting process. And they were asking for more state resources to provide that training and support. And so what we have done as in a response from the Agency of Education is we've really had a threefold response. One, we published our education funding report, and that provides an overview of our funding system in very plain language. We also have provided very targeted support to the field in terms of strategic budgeting. We contracted with New Solutions K-12 to offer a training series to support with some of those challenging decisions. And then we've been working really closely with our business managers to make some improvements to our overall budgeting process to ensure greater predictability and transparency. So I'll move next into our educator focus groups. With the educators, we also did the overview presentation of the data to provide the similar context, and then we hosted and facilitated several breakout discussions that were focused on academic supports, the conditions for success, and thinking about budget prioritization. So when we asked questions around, what type of academic support can the AOE provide to you, we heard again the need for more consistent guidance and clearer direction from the Agency of Education. We heard many of our educators reflecting on the concern about the potential impact of budget cuts. And from the educator perspective, this was really seen in ways of how are we going to provide the range of services and support that we know our students need when we're facing these really challenging budget cuts. Educators also asked for high-quality professional development opportunities and really the agency taking a more active role in that space in ways that are really more embedded in the field so that they can immediately apply their learning. I will share that we have taken that feedback and that went into our development of Read Vermont, which is prioritizing job-embedded coaching in the field. We've heard from educators the importance and value of high-quality pre-K programs, and they were reflecting on the need for those students to have the pre-K experiences so that they're coming in kindergarten with the prerequisite skills to be successful in school. Again, we heard the need for additional support for special education students. And there was a lot of conversation around creating multiple pathways for student success and recognizing that, we definitely are a state that evaluates personalized learning and connecting students with an array of different options after graduation, and really a call to strengthen that approach to ensure that students have those opportunities to explore and pursue their passions. And then the next part of our focus group, we asked educators to reflect on the non-academic supports that are needed. So really thinking about what are the conditions that are prerequisites for our students to be successful in school and what support do our educators need in achieving that. We heard educators talking a lot about some of the broader challenges that our students are facing. Specifically, we heard that many students are facing challenges with housing. They're facing challenges around navigating the need for additional support. And so again, when we talked about this with our educators, it was, it's important to situate the school within the broader community context. And they were highlighting some of the broader challenges around affordability and housing and the opioid crisis and other factors that are impacting a student's ability to learn and are also impacting attendance in school as well. So we heard a call for, doing more and tighter partnerships with community services, the need for additional behavioral support, the need for more mental health services. And then we heard some varied needs. As we talked overall across the state, it was clear that in every community, they were working really intentionally to build community partnerships. In some communities, that's easier and more accessible. In other communities, they might be more separate from those resources, which creates different challenges. We asked the educators specifically to reflect on how the agency can provide additional support. We heard very clearly that educators want to see the AOE as a partner in education, and making sure that we're really able to reflect the challenges and the opportunities, but also celebrating the incredible success stories that we're seeing across the state. Again, we heard a need for greater consistency. By not providing consistent guidance, we're creating more work in the field. And so that's definitely paramount for us to make sure that we're really clear in the guidance, and that being very supportive of being able to meet our intended goals as a state. We heard challenges too about, promoting family engagement, and a request for the agency to be more supportive of creating those practices and guidelines to encourage higher family engagement. We heard again, this tension between local control and statewide consistency, and making sure that we get that balance right, so that we're allowing for local customization while ensuring consistency in terms of those things that are most important to providing educational opportunities for our students. We heard a call for additional professional development, and we know that teacher recruitment and retention is a big issue. And so how can the Agency of Education be a partner in this work? I will share that we are collaborating very closely with our higher education partners. We're in the process of developing a summit where we can really think about the ways in which we can come together to support recruitment and retention, because we know educator workforce issues are a big challenge. So moving into our public engagement sessions, we had, as I said, a really great representation of stakeholder groups. Some of our educators participated both in the focus group and the public engagement session, and then some weren't able to participate in the educator session and came to join later in the evening for the public engagement. We also had a great representation from parents, from legislators, community members, and business owners. We noticed when we started the public engagement sessions that we did not get as much participation from students. And that was really concerning to us. So what we did in response is we partnered with Up for Learning to host separate student focus groups, and we partnered with the Vermont Principals Association to make those happen. And so we really appreciate that partnership, because it was so important for us to get the input from students. In our public engagement sessions, we started again with a data presentation, and then we broke out into smaller group conversations. The first question we asked is, what are the key indicators of student success? How do we as Vermonters define that? We gathered many themes from this. We heard that Vermonters want to make sure that students feel safe, happy, and healthy at school, that's a measure of success. And also there was this desire to ensure we're developing lifelong learners. And so a success factor being that students are curious, excited, and engaged. One community member reflected on this question by saying, I know that we're successful when my child comes home and they're really excited about what they learned at school. And they want to tell me all about it over dinner. And they're making those connections about what they're learning in the classroom and what that could mean for their future career. We heard very consistently, we want students to be able to master the core academic fundamentals, but we also want them to develop life skills and future-ready skills that are going to prepare them for success beyond graduation. We heard a lot about, encouraging students to find their own path, and that our role as a state is to ensure that they're able to explore a lot of different opportunities that tap into their interest and passions for their life after graduation. And again, we heard a call for really holistic measures of student success. As part of the conversation, we asked, what specific opportunities and experiences do you think every Vermont student should have access to? And so this is where we started to get a little bit more specific around what that would look like. When you go into a school, whether you're in the Northeast Kingdom or Southwestern Vermont, there's certain set of experiences we want all of our students to have. And this is where we had a lot of conversation around equitable access, and making sure also that our foundational needs are met, by students, and they're coming in ready to learn. We heard a need for having more differentiated and individualized instruction, and a really big focus on making sure that the learning was hands-on instruction, real world, really helping students to make those connections about the academics and their future careers. We heard also that we want our schools to have strong connections with families and outside partners. And we heard again from the public a call for a more unified and state-driven approach in key areas, not in every area, but in those areas that are really important to ensuring every child has access to equitable educational opportunities. And so overall, this comment I think was great. We want students to be able to access the future they see for themselves. We then moved into conversations around budget sustainability. And we were intentional about asking this as kind of the last set of questions, because I think it's really important for us as a state to first define, how do we measure student success? How do we define those educational opportunities we want every student to have? And then when we think about budget, that's how we prioritize the limited resources we have available, is to ensuring that those things are met. So it was very clear that communities are facing budgeting challenges. Much of this is due to declining enrollment, but we also know that there's rising cost of education, and it's creating a really big challenge. We heard, conversations around a need to increase resource sharing. We heard about a need for regionalization for some services as a potential means of decreasing cost. We also, I think one of the things we've noted is that these challenges are so complex that they really require a multifaceted approach to solve, and that we really need to think about the state level capacity to supporting this work and how we can do this in a way that is leveraging community partnerships and collaboration between state agencies as well. So I think what was really highlighted when we started to talk about budget is that many of these challenges are systemic challenges. And it's very, very difficult to tackle them from a local level, that it really needs more coordinated support and bold leadership to address the barriers to achieving our intended goals for education. Our students were really specific, so it was really encouraging to have the focus group with students. They were able to really break it down in terms of what they want to see in terms of opportunities in school and how that will prepare them for their futures. We asked students to reflect on the strengths. So to put this in context, we met with middle and high school students, and we framed our conversations to reflect on their learning currently at either middle and high school, and also to think back to when they were in elementary school, so that they could give that perspective. It was very clear from our students that a big strength of our system is that our teachers and staff really care, and they felt that teachers and staff members were really going above and beyond to know the student and create an environment where they felt welcomed. And so that sense of community and inclusivity was a real strength of Vermont schools. And I think that's something we should be very proud of. When we talk about challenges, students articulated that there's inconsistent discipline responses to different behavior issues, and there's a need to be clearer around that. And as we think about providing clarity for behavior management, they also called on more effective restorative responses to these challenges. And overall, when we really ask students, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing, and you think about as we're trying to develop, and strengthen our education system, they were really concrete in talking about the learning opportunities. So students are calling for additional opportunities for internship and real-world experiences beyond the classroom, project-based learning, personalized learning, advanced coursework. We heard really consistently from students that they really want to be challenged, and they want to be challenged because it's exciting for them to be able to take on these new opportunities to learn, and that's really valuable to them to have this array of programming. We also heard, and you can see in this quote, that kids want to have fun at school also, and that it's more than just about what they get on the test, but that overall culture and climate is important as well. So we asked students what resources are needed in schools to support student success. They were very clear in saying we need high quality skilled teachers, They emphasize again the need for building strong relationships with students. Again, we heard the need for a wide variety of learning opportunities and choices that challenge students and support their interest. We heard students talking about the need to make real world connections to their learning, really making their learning applicable. Students also reflected on the increased need for additional support, both in terms of academic support and mental health support, in ensuring that every school is a well-maintained, welcoming environment. We heard a lot about the importance of these close relationships and building a strong sense of community. And when we asked students what they need for success, there was one participant from the Heinsberg session that said being able to support yourself and have financial independence and a job that you enjoy, not just because you have to work to survive. So really creating that interest and capacity for applying their passions to their future careers. So what we've done with this information, as I mentioned, this was a very explicit way for the Agency of Education to develop our strategic plan and making sure that we are aligning our work to meet the needs of communities across Vermont. And while we're approaching this as a long-term strategic planning process, we also wanted this process to enable us to be responsive to the needs that emerge all along the way. And so we've done that. Really proud of the team for going into this work with an openness to learn and an agility to make changes to meet the needs immediately within our purview. And so what we have done is we've done some significant data infrastructure improvements that have enhanced our reporting. We've launched Read Vermont to promote statewide literacy outcomes, and that project was designed with the needs of the field in mind, and really making sure that we could provide more targeted on-the-ground support. We've also provided a range of budget training and resources. We know that our districts are engaged in another very difficult budget process, and that we feel it's our responsibility to be part of supporting that effort. We've done that by promoting broader understanding of our education funding system and also targeted support to school districts. We are also in the process of enhancing our state assessment reporting and training, along with working with USED to accelerate our timeline so that we can publish those results earlier so they are more relevant, and thinking about that overall system of continuous improvement and data-driven instruction. So where are we going with all of this information? This is moving into our strategic plan. So out of this, you will see that our priorities will be clearly reflective of what we heard is important to Vermonters. You'll see additional data reporting. While we've concluded the Listen and Learn tour, there's a couple other topical reports that we have committed to, including the special education report that will be released in the next month. And then we're sharing all of this information with the legislature to identify how this input can inform future policy considerations and strengthening our public education system to ensure that we can achieve equity, promote educational opportunities, and support sustainability of the entire system. So I will stop there to see and open it up for questions or comments around this approach.
So let me just stop and first of all say thank you. That was really helpful to, I read the presentation, but also very helpful to have you actually go through it and fill in the details. So thank you for doing that. I will say we are at time. So board members, if we want to have a question and answer on this, I would propose that we put it to later in the agenda after the secretary's report. So let me just take a straw poll. Do people want to do question and answer? And should we tack on some time? I'm seeing Tammy shake her head no. Are we good? Okay. All right. Well, Zoe, thank you so much. So let's take a break and turn off your cameras and microphones if you would, and I will see everyone back here promptly at 11. Thank you. And then we'll go back to the update from the Student Performance Standards Committee. So the update on the budget request is we had discussed at our last meeting, including a link to our revised budget in the annual report that I finalized and sent off to the General Assembly and the Governor's Office. I didn't end up including that link because it included a $5,000 stipend per board member, as well as the cost of our membership in the National Association of School Boards, which we didn't mention that in the annual report. And at the same time, we do want to ask for money to include the cost of a consultant to help the Student Performance Standards Committee. That was not in the budget, but yet it was something that we had discussed that we wanted to ask the legislature for that money. So it felt better to not include a budget that actually didn't reflect our most current thinking. And then what I wanted to do was update the budget to, take those two things off and put in the cost of the consultant, just run that by the board. And then, with your voting to approve it, then I will have that budget in hand in case we are asked further questions about, what the board would like for resources. So let me entertain a motion to approve, and I did email it out to everyone. Has everyone seen it? I mean, it really does just include those line item changes that I went through.
Are we going to have discussion after the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make a motion.
Okay. Motion to approve the updated budget. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Mohammed. Discussion? Kim?
Yeah, I have a problem with removing our opportunity to access national resources on governance, on everything. National Association of State Boards of Ed provide a broad frame of resources to include areas of equity and standards development, statewide mission for education and vision for education. Like a lot of the things that fall within our statutory authority are resourced well with a broader frame of reference than our very narrow Vermont lens on essentially controlling a narrative through a single point of contact in the state for purposes of education. I strongly disagree with removing that budget item. I also feel as though we should consider that the state has already spent $50,000 on a consultant through the work that the Act One group was doing in the development of that. I think we are beginning to, in our committee, wind down some sort of standard understanding of the language and the definitions we're going to use. We've received some good technical assistance and support from the AOE, and I think we've got some avenues through the Curriculum Coordinators Association that have yet to be exhausted. So I would question whether or not we would need a full $25,000. And I have a deep concern for what we've already spent on $23,000 in legal fees when our rulemaking hasn't even been an issue since July 1. So I would ask, where are those monies spent? What is our accountability on that? What's our process for procuring those legal resources? So I'd ask all of those questions before considering any change to the budget. And I strongly disagree with removing our national association.
Okay, so let me respond. You asked 3 questions. Let me kind of go in reverse order. The $23,000 for legal fees was actually left over from the last fiscal year, but we ran out of money. And so we asked Sarah Buxton to hold off submitting her final invoice until the new fiscal year began on July 1st because we did not have the money to pay her. So she kindly agreed to do that, for our benefit, but that's the $23,000. So it was all work that was completed before June 30th.
So if I add that, though, then to the $86,000 spent in 24, we're at $110,000 spent on legal fees and expenses. On procured legal resources, I'm checking, one, how that could be.
We paid Sarah over $100,000, and I forget what the final number was. It might have been $106,000. We also had, I'm trying to remember when our prior attorney stopped working for us, and then we also had another contract with tuition appeals, and so there had been some money spent on that. So all of that adds up, but we have not paid any attorney for legal work done since July 1st of 2024. It's just, it crept into this current budget because we ran out of money. With regard,
I guess I'm not sure that we've got that. Anyway, that is fine, but I'm not sure where accountability to that is. Like Sarah was joining you for presentations in the legislature. I know appropriately for our legal review on our rules, for sure. I'm just not sure sort of the scope of the work she was hired to do, and then the actuality of the work that she did. And I remember the process for trying to procure legal services, and I'm not sure that we kept to the letter of that. And so I find that to be an extraordinary level of expense. And I know that we have the Attorney General's office available to us. So I would invite us to really consider what that looks like, rather than just saying we need to roll over, however much to the next budget cycle. That you wouldn't do that in normal budgeting.
No, but
so that
it breaks down to $50,000 for, a significant rule series like EQS, like 2,200. So, count on $50,000. It is what it is. So with regard to your other questions, I mean, I prioritized the consultant based on what I was hearing, from the Student Performance Standards Committee, conversations with Tammy, the need for the committee to have a consultant. I can tell you right now, we are not, there's no one has come to say, oh, here's some money for you. And we've been talking about this, easily since October as a board, and the conversations that I've had with the governor's office. So as I think about the very limited pot of money and the, likelihood of chance for us to get anything, it seemed to me to be, I'm not saying that in a perfect world, I wouldn't want to rejoin NASB, but what I am saying is I don't think there's money to do everything. And if we had to pick something, what I was hearing was that the consultant was more important.
I think I would say that there are resources that we're not accessing through a national network and association, very specific, as a matter of fact, like standards development and, equity work and a broad pool of resources there that we haven't even considered. And I think the thing we're recognizing, and I was on, I apologize, I thought I didn't click my camera, but I heard you delay our conversation, our 10-minute conversation. And I think we are also, I don't know, for my sake, possibly evolving our thinking of the scope of what we're going to need on the standards, in that the AOE has done some crosswork and technical work for us. They have pointed us to other states who have, since the beginning of this process, since IRIS was sort of wrapped up by Act 1, have put in place other somewhat similar standards. So I think we have a different frame of reference. Whether it's going to cost $25,000 or not, whether we are going to need, $50,000 worth of legal review on it, I honestly don't know. But I just think we have been very insulated from better governance practices as a state board of ed. I think we are not accessing the value of a broader network. And I think it is a disservice. And that happened in John Carroll's first term as chair. And I think it really has proven to have us not have the exposure we could benefit from.
Okay, so I see from Rich that you are at time. I'm going to turn to Tammy.
Kim, I hear you. And of course, you and I are co-chairs of the Standards Committee. And I think Kim is right. Like, the nature of the work on that committee is evolving. But I do know that the committee a month or so ago agreed that having a consultant might be useful for reviewing our final product at some point. And I would really like to keep those money in the budget as a reserve. Obviously, we will be parsimonious with any resources that we use. And if we're able as a committee to feel comfortable recommending something back to the full board in terms of the standards without a consultant, then we certainly will do so. But I do think that it would be prudent to have a placeholder for those resources in our budget. And again, to Jennifer's point, we haven't been approved for any budget yet. So I think it's prudent for us to continue to have those resources sort of earmarked in our budget request. And again, if our work on the Standards Committee progresses in a way where we don't feel like an external review is necessary, then I think we can certainly have those funds either go unused or they can be used for other purposes. I know the CTE rules, we have other things coming up.
All right, thanks. Any further discussion? Okay. Kim?
A question on legal and the sort of rolling over of use of legal resources and the procurement of scope of work and the process of contracting with legal support. Like, can you speak to that when we're talking about literally the largest item in our budget?
So with CTE, we don't have money in our budget to retain an attorney to help us with that work. So now, to be fair, we're waiting to receive a draft copy from the agency before the committee begins its work. We don't have a draft from the agency yet, so there's really no harm in not having an attorney on retainer. But what I can say is if we got a draft copy from the agency tomorrow, we would not be able to begin that work because we don't have the money in our budget for it. So we need increased funding in our budget to be able to hire an attorney to help us.
And are we going back out to a bid process on that? What are we intending to do?
We've already put it out to bid. We can't actually sign a contract because we don't have the money.
Okay, and I'll reflect back in the day, because we're coming up on the end of a 6-year term. We had legal resources available through the AOE, and we had legal resources available through the AG's office. And I think that the legislature might expect that we continue to have other legal resources. If not, then we probably want to bring that to their attention, because I remember Representative Coach Christie being surprised that we didn't have legal support from the AOE.
That was included in the annual report again this year. I mean, this is not the first year but it was included in the annual report. It is not best practice to rely on the agency because we are two different entities, so we can't really rely on their counsel to be sitting in both camps. It's also not appropriate to engage the Attorney General's office to help with rulemaking because they're the ones that would be defending the board if we were to get sued for any aspect of our rules, and then it would disqualify the agency from being able to represent us. So that's a very short answer to your question. But that's why we need our own attorney. So, any further conversation? Are we ready for the vote?
How is the process of the budget? We're going to vote it, and then what happens next?
Then I will have it in my pocket so that if I am asked, last year I was asked to come in and testify to kind of flesh out our annual report. I have not been invited yet, but if I were to be invited, I would have this budget to be able to share. I don't hear any further conversation. So all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Okay, I see Kim's hand.
Nay.
Do we need to do a roll call since it's not unanimous? I believe we do. So Maureen, if you don't mind.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
Jenna O'Farrell,
Yes.
Mohammed Job,
Yes.
Richard Werner,
Yes.
Tammy Colby,
Yes.
Gray Farron,
Yes.
Lyle Jepson,
Yes.
Kimberly Gleason.
No.
Will the chair be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative.
8-1.
Thank you. All right, so let's go back to the update from the Student Performance Standards Committee. So Tim and Tammy, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. Tammy, I'll start and then hop in, if that's okay. So we had the opportunity last week to have the agency join us for a crosswalk of the, as they see, and to give us some, I guess I should say, technical review of the standards, and we focused on the 2 pages and the 4 domains that are the standards. The IRIS framework is a broader document that was provided to the legislature and to the full state board. But what the state board approves are the standards, not the framework or guidance document as the companion. So as we continue to move this forward, that's where we're focused. And the agency folks joined us, and Ian and Martha were able to go through those standards, provide us some background on where it crosses over with other currently existing standards, not in the interest of suggesting they weren't necessary, but rather that the lens of those standards do align in many places with the requirements and other currently existing standards. So that was a very helpful crosswalk. We also recognized that getting a common understanding of definitions, honestly, as we did in the beginning of the EQS, we came to a common understanding of definitions for the document as a starting place. And so we used that as we went through that process with EQS. Similarly, we identified the need to have common understanding of terms and definitions in this body of work with respect to the ethnic studies standards. And so we asked the AOE if they could do that for us. They referenced in the course of their sharing information with us the other similar standards in other states that have come into be and provided us with some links. So we will start the next meeting there. We're also going to reach out to the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association with the terms that we got from the AOE and the standards as a place for them to provide us feedback on. We had a stable of about 4 questions that we are asking of, and it was in the work plan for each of the bodies that of constituents we're going to bring before us to speak about these standards. And I think, can these be operationalized? Where do you see them crossing over with other standards? A stable of the same questions that we posed to the AOE, and we're going to get that from the curriculum coordinators. I am going to reach out to them to see if they can join us Monday. We were waiting to get the terms that the AOE provided us, and they were sourcing the definitions from sort of other AOE resources. So we have not multiple definitions being used across statewide bodies of work. So what did I miss, Tammy or Mohammed or Gray?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. First of all, appreciative of the agency, both Ian and Martha, for their good work on this. They really have provided us with sort of some important context for thinking about what the Act 1 group proposed for standards. And as Kim mentioned, sort of our next step is, and I know everybody here has seen the presentation of the IRIS standards, just as a reminder, that is quite a comprehensive document that provides both standards and also sort of some advice around curriculum and instruction. And so the state board's lane here is around the standards part, not the other kinds of things that are wrapped into that document. So our next step really is to identify what components of the IRIS framework that's been offered to us are in fact standards, and then to really think about the extent to which those standards, the way they are framed, are measurable with respect to what students can know and do, and also to take a look at those standards in light of what other states have done to make sure that we are inclusive, right, of all the dimensions that we would want to incorporate, and then we can start to move from there. We're very appreciative, again, of the agency's work on this, and there are going to be things that are in the IRIS framework that are not standards, but I know that the agency has already reached out to the Act 1 group and it is being very proactive in working with them to think about how they can support implementing the other aspects of the framework that are not standards.
Oops. Thank you. Any comments or questions for the committee? So I think the original timeline had been you guys anticipated finishing this work by about April. I mean, it seems at this point that that would be a rather ambitious goal. Is that correct? Or
I think that we will know more after our meeting on Monday when we make that first sort of delineation about what standards are, what part of the framework are considered standards, what are considered learning targets and things along those lines, and then being able to compare sort of what that is against what we have from other states. I think that's an important next step. And based on that, we should be able to sort of think a little bit more clearly about the work plan going forward. There are important constituent groups within the state that have expressed interest in wanting to speak with the standards community. We have the Shalom Alliance in particular, and also we, as a part of our work plan that we submitted to the full board, will want to be proactive in reaching out to some key groups, our curriculum directors, principals, superintendents, and things along those lines. So there is some of that work to be done. But in terms of whether or not this can be done by April, I think we will know more after our meeting on Monday.
okay. And then my other thought is with regard to, oh, go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say, I think that having the foundational information around definitions and terms was pretty important so that we could hit those groups now with the same sort of blanket email that says, this is what we're looking at. Can you take a look at this? As that work evolves, I think we may have additional resource documents for them to look at. So we may need folks to circle back with us. I think we're just trying to be thoughtful about the planning and understanding. April was important in that the newest version of the EQS is effective July 1. And so the field, I think, needs a little cueing as to what we are considering meeting standards in this category. Those are referenced under the content area standards section of EQS, and there isn't something for them to look at. So I think the field, is taking in the broader framework right now to understand what it might look like in their classrooms, but we have not blessed the standards that show up in 3 of those pages of that framework, and we are doing that now. I think that we will continue to meet twice a month, and that will be true until there's a new me, whether that's the March meeting or whatever. But assuming that is the case, then there's a handful of meetings. We changed the dates on some of them because there were some Monday holidays. So folks will see that those are updated online to get us in our meeting space and not interrupt the holidays. So.
Okay, thanks. The one thing I was going to say, which kind of goes back to your comment, Kim, about the definitions and guidelines, is if you can include that with our February agenda, just so that the board is kind of seeing, how these definitions are sort of coming together. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we will certainly do that. We didn't get them until Monday evening, I think, or that's when I saw them come through. So we haven't, as a committee, been able to look at them, but we'll certainly make sure. And as a matter of fact, it may make sense at the February meeting to do just a cover summary on our documents and something actually written for the board to take a look at.
Yeah, thanks. I think that'd be helpful.
And as a reminder to the board members, the Standards Committee is meeting every other Monday evening. So if members of the board have interest in this topic, you certainly join us at those meetings, but the cadence of work is quite quick here, and certainly we can provide an update at the February meeting that's substantive as well.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. Okay, so now we are to the update on the Commission of the Future of Public Education in Vermont. So I have a couple of updates, and then we can have a discussion. But one is, at our last board meeting, I mentioned that I would follow up with Chair Roy about the conversation that the board had had with regard to the vote that I believe took place on December 16th to approve the report that was sent to the General Assembly. So I did speak with her over break. And, she and I spoke. She did say that she didn't think that she could connect with our meeting cadence any more than any other organization that is represented on the commission, because she can't adjust the voting time for any one particular entity. So I hear what she's saying. I wanted to report that back to the board. So The next update is the January meeting of the full commission. Let me pause there. Kim?
It can wait, Jennifer. It was just a question of whether or not there's a work plan for the group that might help us inform what your representation. But why don't you finish your overview and we'll see if.
Sure. So the January meeting of the full commission, the sort of brief summary there, and you do have the minutes in your packet, is that we are in a bit of a holding pattern until we receive direction from the General Assembly. The commission, as you all know, is contemplated to cease to exist on December 31st of 2025. There is a report that is contemplated that is due to be finalized. Well, the first draft is to be finalized in October with a 30-day public comment period. And then we need to review the public comment period and submit it to the General Assembly by December 15th of this year. So if you kind of do the work backwards, we have between now and October to do a whole lot of work. And 2 points kind of arose from that. One is it's an awful lot of work to get done in 9 months. And so we probably need to prioritize the work that's being done. And secondly, there's a recognition that I think what I've heard from certain members, and this has not been a full decision of the General Assembly, but I've heard some members of the General Assembly speak to say we need to have a decision in place by the end of the legislative session, which then begs the question, how does that shift the work of the commission and how best can we support the General Assembly? And does the commission's charge need to be redefined?
Can you hear that? Just because this is not working. It's like I think close the door.
I think someone needs to mute.
Amanda, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern because we had this meeting on January 6th and the legislature, had not got up and running yet. So we are expecting at our next meeting on February 3rd that we would receive and discuss any relevant updates from the legislature. And I'll let me stick a pin in the February 3rd meeting because I'm just going to keep going through recapping the January meeting. So holding pattern until we receive direction from the General Assembly. I also note that I believe Chair Roy testified this morning before the General Assembly about the work of the commission. Don't have an update on that. I saw that. And we decided at the January meeting that we wanted to keep chipping away at the work that had been assigned to us. So Zoe, on behalf of the agency, gave a presentation on the foundation formula, which is a student-centered funding approach, and her findings from the Listen and Learn tour, which the board was just privy to a little bit earlier. There was a steering committee meeting this past Monday that I was not able to attend, but the summary from that is there was a discussion on how the commission can be the most effective in meeting its charge in the current context. The group affirmed that the commission remains uniquely suited to analyze the intersecting policy challenges within the context of its guiding principles of equity, quality, and sustainability and affordability. And we need to be realistic about our capacity to achieve all requirements set forth in Act 183. So the next meeting of the commission will be on February 3rd. It will be a hybrid meeting. We are planning to, again, receive and discuss any relevant updates from the legislature. I think there's also going to be time to meet with the communication and engagement consultants that have been hired. And then the final thing is to develop a work plan for the remaining months. And then the steering group also decided that for at least the foreseeable future, the commission is going to start meeting every 2 weeks. So we'll still be meeting in person on the first Monday of the month. And then the third Monday of the month will be a virtual meeting. So I will pause there if anyone has any questions. And Kim, I know you still have questions. Anyone else? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then takes.
Jennifer, I'm sorry, I was waiting to see if anybody else had questions. I did. So just to clarify that the first meeting of the month is always going to be virtual. Is that what you said? The first or the
No.
third?
First meeting will be in person.
Okay.
The
But
third,
February 3rd is virtual.
no, February 3rd will be in person. I believe final arrangements are being made, but the location has not been announced yet. So February 3rd will be in person. And that the plan should be that there will be a commission meeting from 1 to 4, followed by a community engagement session in the evening. And then the third Monday of the month will be a commission meeting, virtual, and I don't believe there will be a community engagement session attached to that.
Okay, thank you. And then do you have any key questions that you'd like our input on for that February 3rd meeting? The minutes are interesting and somewhat helpful, but I wonder if as a matter of practice, and this will be for you all, if Jennifer continues to represent the State Board of Ed, what is helpful for the board to have sort of a recap of, and as you just provided orally, and then what areas can you anticipate wanting board input on so that you can represent the body in those meetings? So you've got one coming up February 3rd. I'm just wondering if there's anything there.
I think a lot of that is going to be driven by any change in our charge that's given to us by the General Assembly. And I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay. I would just encourage, as you guys think about how this work moves forward, if we're going to actually offer a voice to this work, that as a matter of practice, maybe collectively, again, I say you guys because, likely after February, it's not me or Jenna, but that would provide a way that you guys are going to interact with this information. If this is going to have an endpoint that's the end of the legislative session, you need a way of feeling informed by this body if this body is going to feel represented in those conversations. And I think that came up as a concern in previous meetings with us here, but I feel like, by design, it could be approached differently.
I mean, it's hard for me to know what we're going to be discussing at the February meeting other than that agenda. I mean, I do think it's fair to guess that, since the governor's office has announced this proposed shift to the foundation formula, that we will probably be discussing that. So we had, Zoe provided to the commission a overview of what a foundation formula looks like. And I believe, Zoe, you are not doing that with the board today, but maybe that's something that the board might want to hear, just so that we can be informed about what that looks like and, what are the nuances involved with it. Does that address your concern? I mean, I hear what you're saying, Kim, and I am trying to be as inclusive and responsive as possible, both by, including the minutes, having these conversations, announcing when the next meetings will be. And then, of course, any member is always welcome to go to those meetings. And I'm always, my phone is almost always on. So.
No, I think so. Again, if you're representing this body in the next conversation is going to be around foundation formula. And it's great that Zoe's updating people on what that means and what the governor means by it. But you guys sit there separately representing separate bodies in theory. And so having this board understand and think about in the context of our responsibilities, any implications or questions we have regarding a student-centered formula, I think is pretty important. And this would be the opportunity to be able to do that, probably maybe more importantly than other things that have been on the agenda. So I think if you're representing us independently of, the AOE, then you need to have information to inform that representation, not by saying you guys can come to the meeting, it's public, not by saying you can read the minutes. Like that is not, engaging to understand how the board feels about any matter that you are sitting there representing us with.
Okay, but look, I'm reporting on the January meeting, and the January meeting didn't have any substantive decisions that were made. So
I'm not asking in defense of that, Jennifer. I'm just saying as a model of how you guys move this forward, you can't represent the board if all we're hearing about is the rearview mirror of the minutes. If the coming up on the topic is the discussion of the student-centered foundation formula, then this would be a time to be having that conversation with this board to bring a representative position to that conversation in February. It is, I think that's how you represent when you sit on behalf of a body. I think it's really important because otherwise this board is just getting reported out after the facts in information that they can read in minutes of public meetings.
So playing the timeline on this, Kim, we finalized today's agenda last Friday and it was posted. The steering group met on Monday, 2 days ago, after the State Board of Ed's agenda was posted, and created the agenda for the next monthly meeting of the full commission. So as I sat there last week finalizing the agenda, I didn't have the benefit of the steering committee meeting that happened 2 days ago. So I hear what you're saying about the cadence. I'm just not sure what I can do to fix that other than reschedule State Board of Ed meetings so that...
No. Yeah, I'm going to offer you creative thinking around it, Jennifer.
Sure.
You could, even in that, hold space in this 15 minutes and say, minutes were included, folks, but here are the things we're focusing on that I just learned about. And I'd like to give you a 101 on foundation formula, or just anticipate that like this needs to be a 20-minute discussion if I'm going to go represent you guys in the coming month. We're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes defending a current process that doesn't offer you as much information as I think you deserve to have to bring forward representation of this body independent of the AOE on that commission. And I'm not sure if this is what's going to drive everything else and the reason why we're not doing a strategic vision for education and we're ignoring some of our statutory responsibilities. I don't know what else is more important. And so for you all here that are going to help inform Jennifer's future representation, if that continues to be the case on this commission, then I think that you may want to think about a more productive process than what is currently happening. And this is what has been happening since the fall. So I just implore you all to think about it differently, more proactively. You know what the agenda is. You may know that this is going to be out of sync all the time. Hold the space for it. Have a couple of questions that you think are going to be really helpful for you to bring back the thinking of this board. I strongly encourage that. Otherwise, it's not representative at all.
Thanks. Tammy?
Thanks. I understand about the cadence of the meetings, it doesn't work. So perhaps this might be helpful. I know that there are at least 2 issues that may come before the commission that I would hope and expect that we would discuss as a full board prior to you voting or making commentary on a particular issue without consulting us. And those issues are restructuring the authority of the state board or the relationship between the agency and the state board, and 2, decisions around a student-centered or foundation funding formula. This board, as a body, has unique interest and expertise in those areas, right? And it relates directly to our rulemaking authority because we have rules around finance, we have rules around sort of what we do. And so on those 2, I understand there's a cadence of meetings, but those 2 issues, I think that if those issues are on the agenda, then the board needs to be notified of those and that we need to create space for us to have a full conversation as a group so that you are informed about the board's perspectives on those issues before you go into the meeting. There may be other issues, but those are 2 that come to mind that I think are particularly important and likely to come up before the commission. And that I think that you need to be speaking with this body as a group prior to making comments or taking votes.
So just to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying, if either of these things are on a commission agenda, it would make sense for me to probably schedule a special meeting of the full board to discuss them in advance of that commission meeting.
I think
And
that would be one option. I think, one of the things we're going to talk about in the Roles and Responsibilities Committee could also be a legislative committee where this is part of their charge. So you had a smaller group to convene, and that's something we can discuss. But I think I understand the challenges of meeting logistics, but I think we can identify as a group some key issues, and those are two that come top of my mind, where the board likely would like to have some discussion about those issues prior to you weighing in on those issues on our behalf.
So, and we had talked about, this is the universe of what we know with the board, which is not new information for anyone. I'm just recapping what we've all discussed. The Roles and Responsibilities Committee developed its estimate of what it would cost for us to meet each of our statutory duties. We brought that before the full board. We had a discussion. The board agreed with that approach. Then we met with the governor's office and made that presentation. I've heard nothing more about that. But I think anything that was contained, in that email and discussion that we had, first in the Roles and Responsibilities Committee and then subsequently with the board, I feel comfortable with being able to represent that this was the process that the board followed. Here's our estimate of what it would cost. And we have not, as a board, and I have not as a person, opined on, what aspects of our statutory duty I think the board should or should not retain. As I sit here, I'm not sure that's, my decision to have to make. I mean, it's in statute. I think that's going to be something that needs to be decided by the General Assembly. But I think, we can talk about what the board offers and we can talk about challenges for the board, most notably lack of funding, lack of support. This is basically a volunteer job. We all have regular jobs. And so it is a balance trying to fit in, these responsibilities that have been given to the board within our current structure. And we have received, criticism and confusion from other entities about what the board does, because there are things that we're supposed to be doing that we're clearly not. I think it is unrealistic to think the way we are set up that we can meet all of our statutory duties. So something needs to change. I'm not sure what that something is. And so I'm not hiding anything in my back pocket that I'm going to pull out because I don't know. But I hear and I agree that it would be important to have that conversation as a board. But what I want you to know is if the issue does come up, that is information that I do have that I would feel comfortable sharing. So let me just see if anyone else.
Can I follow up? I had my hand up, so I didn't know how that worked. I guess my point being is that this morning earlier, you alluded to the fact that you were anticipating that this was going to be a discussion topic. That was something you said earlier today. So if that is an anticipated discussion topic, then I think we need to have a conversation about that as the board. And I think you just articulated your perspective on that issue. And I agree with you, obviously, about, we've created this table, but I don't know that we have, as a group, have had a conversation where everyone has endorsed the perspective that you just shared.
Okay. My recollection was when the Roles and Responsibilities Committee went through this exercise, we decided as a committee that it was not our place to decide what we thought we should or should not be doing. And we communicated that to the board, and the board signed off on that, spreadsheet of this is what it would cost for us to get a consultant. This is what it would cost for someone to help us with the strategic vision. So this isn't like my perspective.
However, if the commission is going to make recommendations, that's different, right? So yes, we said as a board, you as a commissioner may be making recommendations as a part of your responsibilities on the commission. That's different than what we've done before. And what I'm saying is that if in fact that topic is going to be a topic addressed by the commission, not by the board, addressed by the commission, then that is something we all need to discuss prior to you having an informed discussion with the commission in your role as a commissioner. That's different. Yes, we had a discussion on the roles and responsibilities about our budget. And no, I don't think we should be making, that's not our role. However, the commission has been charged with making recommendations to the legislature. And you are representing us on the commission.
And as I just said, what I would say to the commission, what I would say to the General Assembly is that as a board, I'm going to circle back, but as a board and me personally, I mean, I think those two things are in alignment. I don't feel like it is my place or that I have an answer as to what I think the board should or should not be doing. So I am not going to be voting on anything for the commission without having a discussion with the board. But I think it would be accurate to say that if the commission is interested in knowing about what the board thinks about its roles and responsibilities, that synopsis that I just provided is an accurate synopsis of where the board is to date. And then that puts that information out there. I think it would be appropriate to say if there are specific things that the commission wants the board to consider, then I can bring this back to the board. We can have a robust conversation, and then I can report back out to the commission. So, I mean, that's sort of my best offer there. Other board members' comments or questions? Because I see Kim still has her hand raised, and I want to make sure other people get a chance to chime in.
Saw Zoe's hand before.
Oh, okay. I don't see
no.
It can wait until the secretary's report. I was just going to respond to some of the questions regarding the governor's proposed framework.
Okay. Kim, I'll go back to you.
Yeah,
and then
thank you.
Let me just point out that we are at time on this agenda item. So
great. I will set my own timer for 3 minutes and make sure I get it. I think importantly, I would say if we are making a decision to not do things that are in our statutory authority, we are making a decision to not do those things. So things like engaging with school boards and informing legislation and things like that. So they're in our statutory authority. By not doing them, we are making a decision to not do them. There may be resources on the National Association level that we just decided not to be a member of that would help us know how other state boards of ed do it within their constraints of budget and structure. Again, I think that we have chosen to insulate ourselves to that, just which we know, all concentrated under the governor's authority. And I think that makes for a not separately representative body if what we have to offer is that which the agency is offering. And if it is not otherwise informed by a conversation of this board, it is not separate representation. I think it's a problem. And I wonder what it would take, maybe Rich, you know, to establish a legislative committee. This body used to have one, and that existed in the very beginning of my term. It was here as a body. There is no statute or rule that says that that goes away after a 2-year cycle. So in theory, it may still exist. I wasn't on that committee. I believe it was like Peter Peltz and Bill Mathis. You know, obviously it's been a bit of time since that happened, but this is the very thing that in the absence of a special meeting, we might have the opportunity to have informed representation. And I would strongly encourage, and I'd like to know what it takes to establish that here today, to ask that this body establishes a legislative committee to inform time-sensitive matters for your representation.
Briefly, because we are out of time. It is established, we follow Robert's Rules of Orders. That's in our rules. So Robert's Rules of Order has a process for how to create a committee. When Tammy and I spoke about the fact that we were trying to have a roles and responsibilities committee this month, and we were unable to do so because, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, sickness, holidays, family visits, conflicting schedules. We tried, we could not get a meeting scheduled. We have discussed that at the Roles and Responsibilities Committee that will happen, and we need to get one scheduled. We will be talking about this idea of a legislative committee and then bring that back to the board at the next meeting. And with regard to committees, They need to be, and again, this is in Robert's Rules of Order. I did verify that. They need to be re-upped every time we have an election cycle. So this is something that we will have to do for all of our committees at our March meeting. But I think I answered all of the questions.
Okay, well, standing committees can exist there. Sorry, my time just came up, but you shared some of that with me. So I'm just going to say it says name a committee, select a leader, identify the members, define the purpose, set a timeline. Like, we've been asking about this for a long time, and I don't believe that it's true that you can only establish committees in March, because we've established committees at plenty of other times.
I'm saying to your question.
And why can't we establish a committee right now, Jennifer? Charge you to.
Because Tammy and I, as chairs of the Roles and Responsibilities Committee, decided that at our next Roles and Responsibilities Committee, we are going to discuss this as the agenda item, and then we are going to bring it before the full board.
Why is a subcommittee responsible for the establishment of an independent committee on the full body? Why wouldn't we have that conversation in this full body? Why are we wasting an inordinate amount of time to stand in the way of establishing a legislative committee to help inform representation in the legislature when the legislature is in session? I don't understand it.
Because that got delegated to the Roles and Responsibilities Committee. And I'm going to turn to Tammy, and then we need to move on.
Yeah, my understanding, as we're trying to start having written procedures, is that the Roles and Responsibilities Committee will be responsible for establishing committees, right? And in doing so, writing up sort of their charge and their membership and things along those lines. We did that for the Standards Committee, for example, this spring. So, to Jennifer's point, no, we weren't able to get a Roles and Responsibilities Committee together over the holidays. I think we need to get one very quickly. It sounds like this is a priority. I think the question that I have is, and I don't know, and this might be a question for our parliamentarians, is if in fact, the Roles and Responsibilities Committee is able to meet quickly and we come up with a proposal for the full board to consider, are we able to take a roll call vote on establishing that committee via email or some other way, or do we have to wait for the February meeting to do that? Because I think, to Kim's point, the legislature is up and going. At the same time, we all got lives and we couldn't get together over the holidays. So I'm wondering if there's a compromise here.
I don't have an answer to that question. I'm getting a lot of feedback, but I do think that we can't vote by email because we haven't warned that as a meeting.
Is there anything to say we couldn't warn an email a vote that way?
How would the public attend?
I'm just asking, right? Because I know on other organizations, we figured out ways during the pandemic to do email voting. It may be impossible. I was just trying to think, is there a compromise here in trying to move something forward? That's all. If you're saying it's not, if it's impossible, it's impossible.
I'm looking at Rich. Or Zoe, if you have an answer.
I don't have an answer on that, but I think as you're working through those logistics, there may be a more straightforward approach and being able to invite the board members to present questions or considerations directly to you, Jennifer, as a school board chair, that you could be able to, or as a state board chair, that you could be able to share with the commission. I'll provide a little bit of an overview of my secretary's report around what to expect in terms of additional details that will be forthcoming. I think that will be an opportunity to provide that feedback, at least in the interim and a short-term period, as you're defining the mechanism by which you'll engage a subcommittee to do that more frequently.
Okay. Tammy, to your question, that was my gut answer. I can see if I can get you a real answer, and if so, then
it might just be a helpful thing to know, Jennifer. Just generally, if we need to take sort of nominal votes here and there, what that might look like. Right. It is hard to get the full body together. And for something like this, it might be if we're able to do something electronically, that might just be a good thing for us to know.
Okay. All right. So we're going to leave it here. I'm going to move on and
I'm sorry, Jennifer, I just need to ask if the committee, if you have to wait for a committee to bring back something for the full vote of this board, why can't this board vote right now to charge you with establishing a legislative committee?
because we haven't talked about it yet, Kim, and it has been delegated to the Roles and Responsibilities Committee. It is on the agenda that Tammy and I discussed, and we are going to follow the same process that we did for standing up the Student Performance Standards Committee.
No, that one got shifted from EQS, and
Right.
EQS existed as a committee before, and we just renamed it. So we did that as a full body. That didn't happen in a roles and responsibilities. A subcommittee authorizing the existence of a committee that we've been asking about, that the answer before was that it just sunsetted, and it is probably the most important thing that you are trying to do right now. And it is not informed by this body. It's really offensive that we are not going to be able to establish something that provides informed representation.
Okay, I hear your point. Thank you. I'm moving on. Zoe, I'm going to turn it over to you for the Secretary's report.
I'll be brief because I know we're short on time. I did want to just respond directly to one of the questions related to the special ed presentation, and we will provide follow-up with the actual data report. There was questions around the specific slide related to the percentage of special education students by grade level. That is representing among all of the students that have an IEP in the state, what percentage of them are in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and so forth. So we'll provide that data file to you so you have an understanding of what's represented in there, but I just wanted to directly address that.
So just to clarify, so all those numbers should add up to 100 then, correct?
Of those,
if it's the percentage of the pie, they should all add up to 100, correct?
They should add up to the, whatever it is, 15,000 students that are.
Well, these are percentages. These are percentages,
so
not counts.
So what I'm reflecting back to you is we will give you the full data file, but I wanted to clarify that we're representing different things. Again, that's why we're going to make sure we're clear on the student counts, but just wanted to follow up with that so that you had an understanding of what to expect when you get the data file. Also, there were some questions just overall around the recent security breach, so I can provide some more details in writing, but just to give assurances that the Agency of Education, Agency of Digital Services, the State Attorney's Office have been involved in supporting the field with that response. There's been a lot of conversation around the board's role in providing input on future policy considerations, whether that come out of the commission or the administration. And I think that's really important because it's going to be valuable to get that input. Ultimately, we're all working together to try to achieve the best set of policies that are going to support educational outcomes. So briefly wanted to give an update on what the governor has communicated and what will come next. So during the governor's inaugural address, he signaled a very strong commitment to strengthening Vermont's public education system. He presented a policy framework to address the full complexity of our educational challenges. And in the coming weeks, the administration will present a comprehensive proposal that will include recommendations to shift to a foundation formula, to a simplified governance model, and will also focus very heavily on educational quality. He did indicate an interest in providing a more immediate tax relief, assuming we can hold the budgets tight. That gives the legislature the ability to focus more on the future and thinking about the broader transformation for our state. The recommendation by the governor and the administration has been informed directly by the Agency of Education's Listen and Learn Tour and all the data that we've been pulling together. This really has come forward through a very collaborative process and will need to continue to be informed in a collaborative process. So we expect and will continue to need that two-way conversation to identify those considerations that are important for us to address and to take into account. So by his budget address, we'll provide more details around the specifics of the proposal, and we'll be seeking specific input and consideration. So I think at that point, it would be really clear for the board to be able to identify, here are some of the questions that we have. Have you considered this? What about, if we made this change? So all of that will need to be part of our ongoing work through this legislative session, and I'm looking forward to that opportunity to provide input. This type of transformative change is very complex and will require a lot of input from a variety of different stakeholders and experts. And so we expect for that to occur, and we'll be encouraging that as well. We are providing as an agency a series of testimony to the General Assembly over the next couple of weeks to share some background that is informing our thinking around this proposal, and ultimately, really thinking about how do we not just talk about an education funding system, but a funding system that's really prioritizing those strategies that are going to yield great outcomes for our kids. And that's really the focus as we move forward. Ultimately, the decision is, of course, within the General Assembly around what policy they will pass, but we really do see this as an opportunity to be very collaborative and are very committed to that as we have been up until developing some of these recommendations for policy. So just wanted to give everyone an update on that, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Zoe. Jana, and then Tammy.
Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate you, holding space for the board to identify some questions moving forward. I just might need a no, and you can tell me no, but I'll stop. And in a few months, I won't even be here to ask the question. But I can't ask again. I guess I am asking again. Could we please get a report in writing ahead of time? I think that would be so helpful if I could, even everything that you just said, if I had that before, I could have read it and I could have asked you some questions even right now that I might not have thought of. And it's okay to tell me no if that's just the answer, but I can adjust my line of thinking when you're giving a report, but I just always want to engage, and I feel like I don't have the enough material to be able to do that.
Okay. Tammy?
My comment is similar but different, and that is, Zoe, I know that you and the governor's office are actively working on this proposal. When can we expect to see something written that we can actually review and react to?
So I shared, I think I've shared with you the testimony schedule. So we've laid out that approach. So it's kind of the bookends of the governor's inaugural address, establishing the framework. We're providing a testimony schedule to build background knowledge. And then at the time of the budget address, there will be more detail. If we're able to provide more detail earlier, we will, because we understand that there's a real sense of urgency to be able to articulate as much detail as possible, as soon as possible. So as that gets confirmed, I will make sure to share with the board so that you have the full breadth and understanding of where we are in that framework development.
So a quick clarifying question. What you're saying is that we can expect to see a written description of your policy recommendations at the time the governor does his budget address, but not sooner?
Likely sooner, and that's what we're pushing towards.
Okay, and then we will have an opportunity to engage with you around that prior to the address or after the address?
As an entire board or individually?
And in both.
Okay. So I think as an entire board, that would be up to you in terms of establishing a separate meeting to engage in that way. But certainly I would be open to provide, being available for questions. I welcome the questions and considerations you bring. I think that'll be important as we move forward. And the other thing I would mention is that there's a whole legislative session where we'll be working through a lot of the details. So even within the budget address, there's going to be we're going to be able to identify, here are some points that will still need policy consideration and choices. So it's a good start for us to get into this session. It's based on a lot of research, initial modeling, the data, what we've heard from the listen and learn, but we know that there's going to need to be fuller discussions in testimony and with stakeholders to make sure that we have addressed the full set of considerations. So I just want to level set expectations there, that there's an expectation that there'll be further dialogue around these pieces and potential adjustments as we move forward.
And just my last clarifying question. So are you presenting that information to the commission at the same time? Is the board will receive it, or will the commission receive that information prior to us, or how does that work?
So in terms of as a formal body, in terms of a meeting, or I think you all are on a different schedule.
I'm just
So
trying to figure out when people on this group, in this group here, are going to have something written that they can respond to. I mean, I've heard sort of
So-
the top level and
Yep.
and all
So
of that.
this, everyone
But a foundation
will have
formula is
something.
not a foundation formula is not a foundation formula, and a student-centered formula is not a student-centered. Like, there's a lot of variability out there. So
And what
it'd be really good to see the details.
Yeah, and so what we've talked about and what we've been providing background to the commission is there's states approach some version of a foundation formula in a lot of different ways. And so you're right, we're going to need to be really clear about what choices we're making as a state and how we're prioritizing those choices. Absolutely. So the board, the commission, the general public will get a full written report at the same time. And our intent is to accelerate that as quickly as possible.
There are 32 different ways foundation formula are implemented by states.
Yep.
So it'll be really important that we see the details.
That's right.
Okay, Gray and then Kim.
I'm still stuck on the special education slide. That one slide, I know we've talked about it a lot. Just to clarify, those percentages for each grades are the percentage of students on IEPs in that grade.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, I mean, we talked about this, but I do want to say that's very misleading because I definitely read the slide to mean, as I think we all did, percentage of students, you know, in that grade that are on IEPs. And I would be very careful with that slide and that information unless it's very clear about what that means.
Thank you.
So I think what we've really signaled clearly as an agency is if we're presenting data and there are questions about it, we're going to make sure that we're clarifying, right? So thank you for the question. It's clearly an area that needs further description, and we will absolutely have the backup data available to you. So part of this work is being able to have that engagement, right? We are very committed to making sure that data can be used to inform decision making and to inform thoughtful and impactful policy that's meaningful to students. So I appreciate the questions, and I would just say that as we continue to move forward, there's going to be more questions, right? And we're going to need to make sure that we can respond to those and provide context. So we welcome the questions, we welcome the input, because ultimately it needs to be able to stand alone so that it is helpful to our conversation and driving decisions that are important to students.
Kim and then Lyle.
It's okay to go to Lyle first. I've spoken more recently.
Did you already speak?
Go ahead, Lyle. Not on this topic at all, but I know that Lyle hasn't spoken on the last couple, so I'm okay with waiting.
Okay.
Well, I'll just jump in then. I just wanted to actually thank Zoe for and appreciate the fact that you're doing the amount of reporting that you are doing and the fact that you are accelerating that, and that what I have seen, and I think the public sees, is that when they ask for clarification, you do that pretty quickly. Great evidence of that is the Vermont education profile. You went back, you clarified. I'm sure you're going to do that yet again. So thank you for doing that as this process unfolds. And it's a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Kim, back to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll go quick. I want to just follow up on Jenna's question, and you can answer after I get through all of them, but it would be helpful to have the secretary's report in writing. For other statewide boards that I'm on, we get a CIO report in writing. In school boards, we get a superintendent's report in writing. It's really helpful. And I noticed that you read from notes, so it doesn't have to be super formal, but something that helps guide, as Jenna said, our information to help us pose our questions. Otherwise, we are in a lag that is, not getting these conversations in public, and that's unfortunate. And then, so you can answer that after, but the student-centered funding sounds like vouchers. And I think that is concerning. And if the State Board of Ed is going to be in a position to respond to policy considerations, it'd be great if we have that information to Tammy's request before the news media gets it, because I think it's happened more than once that we are coming into information after I'm seeing it in the press. And I think it did happen for us around CTE last legislative session. We had the AOE in to talk to us about CTE. The next thing we see, they're making a policy recommendation literally like 2 days later in the legislature without any information to our board to suggest that the AOE would take rulemaking for CTE. And so that creates a disconnect that is not beneficial to anyone. And I think that is remedied by, a very different practice and a consideration for the respect of the role we have in this work, to not be a secondary source for what's happening. And we really can't be informed to help you to ask informed questions if we don't have information ahead. I didn't notice our slides to be up when I looked for materials over the weekend from any of the stuff that came to us today. It just makes it difficult. So I guess, Zoe, to the question, will you be able to provide us reports in writing? And can we anticipate that we will have materials in advance of it being presented to other bodies?
So yes, we can certainly continue to improve upon that. Some of my secretary's report is in response to the conversation. So I made notes as you were talking to make sure I could clarify where there were misconceptions. But certainly there's a value in being able to submit that early. I want to be clear that the administration is not proposing a voucher program. We are talking about a foundation formula that is prioritizing investment in strengthening our public education system and ensuring that we're investing dollars in ways that are going to promote student outcomes. That's the focus, and I understand that there's a need for more details as we move forward. In terms of building broader awareness, we've worked really intentionally with the Commission. The Commission has been the body that has been asked and charged to be reviewing these recommendations. The agency has been very transparent and very forthcoming in sharing our learning, bringing in our consultants to be able to further provide those details. I think there's value in making sure that the state board has that information as well. And there's always opportunities for us to improve upon the cadence so that everybody is getting information in a timely way. So certainly there's always opportunities to improve upon that. And we're very committed to doing that.
Thanks. And if I might, because I didn't use my full 3 minutes, the procurement process for your consultant, how did that happen? Like, how did you guys choose that consultant for this work?
So there's, what's that? Sorry, we're getting pulled into different things. So this work with our consultant actually started way back in June. So we, as you know, had commissioned a consultant to provide recommendations around funding and governance reform for career and technical education. When I first received that report, education ecosystem for Vermont. At the time, we were developing our Listen and Learn tour, so it was an expansion of that. So not just singularly recommending changes within CTE, but we knew that we needed to understand those changes within the broader context. And so this was part of an effort to be able to contextualize those recommendations within that broader view. We had a very clear contract around how we were engaging with the Listen and Learn tour and how all of these different projects were dovetailing to help us to establish comprehensive recommendations. I can certainly give you the details around the actual procurement process, but I think the intention here is that, this has been work we've clearly prioritized to make sure that we're giving informed recommendations. The Commission refused or declined to hire an education policy expert. And so it was really incumbent on the agency to make sure that we had those additional resources to provide some guidance and support as we're doing this work.
Okay. Let me just point out we are at time, and I see, Tammy, you've got your hand raised. I don't see any other hands raised, so you're the final person. Oh, you're muted.
I will follow up in an email to you and Zoe.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
Okay. So
sorry,
this
I do have to jump off.
Okay, thank you. This takes us to future meeting planning. And so on my list for February, February is typically when we do school waivers. So I'm anticipating that that will be something that the agency will bring to us. We'll have updates on the commission, committee updates. I will reach out to Katie Ballard because she is supposed to be meeting with the board quarterly and was last in before the board in November. So quarterly would make it February. So I will reach out to her and see if she has a report that she would like to either submit to the board and or, come before the board. The agency has, we had talked about doing Portrait of an Adult Learner on this month's agenda. That has been pushed to next month. And then we will also have a presentation by the Advisory Council on Literacy. They had a report that they submitted to the board. It's an annual report. And I spoke with or emailed with Gwen Carmoli and asked if she would like to come in and present. So she thought that that would be really helpful. We will also have recognition of our two members who are going off the board, Kim and Jenna. So we can look forward to thinking about, really reflecting on the last 6 years and the monumental amount of work that they have both contributed to the board. So I think that will be a nice inflection point. I do not have anything else on my list. Does anyone have anything to add? Okay. Rick.
Jen, we just, so I think the foundation formula, I kind of remember, I thought that was something Cunin did when she was governor. And I think when I first got on the board, that's what we were operating under. But since it sounds like that's something that's been thrown out there, could we maybe have a brief discussion on that and get some information on that?
Yes.
And then,
I knew I was missing something. Thank you.
And then the only other thing I had for notes was, and maybe you hit it and I missed it, but I think the student performance standards group said they would be getting us definitions to review.
Mm-hmm. So that will be under committee updates, okay. But yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Kim, did your... Yes.
Yeah, I would again strongly recommend considering the governance issues raised at the beginning of the meeting, and I will share the resources that I've got, and I'll send them to the full board. I would really feel as though you guys would benefit from that, and I'd like to see an action item on establishing a legislative committee. Right. Only the full body can do that. It is not something that the committee, your subcommittee, can do.
All right. Okay. This brings us to our final public comment. If there are any members of the public who wish to be heard, can raise the hand icon on the Teams platform to raise your hand, or *5 if you're calling in. Amanda, welcome.
And I apologize before my computer broke, and that's why I was unmuted. Today I'm actually doing this as a community member, not with my hat with the Human Rights Commission. I am talking to you as a mom, so if I cry, forgive me. Just because you had the disability, the reports on kids on IEP, I wanted to just share today that I'm here to share this story because I think you need to do more. The state needs to do more. So, give me 1 minute. My son Henry is 8 years old. He just turned 9 December 4th. He's loving, kind, and full of potential. Yeah, the systems meant to support him are not doing it, and instead are breaking him little by little. Henry was diagnosed with a developmental delay when he was 2. A couple of years ago, he was finally diagnosed with ADHD. His school used that as a reason to stop evaluating more other learning challenges that he had, insisting that his diagnosis was enough to explain his struggles with reading and writing. They claim additional diagnoses weren't necessary because he was already receiving the supports that he had. But the truth is, those supports don't address his unique needs as a child with dyslexia and dysgraphia, which he just got diagnosed finally after advocating for 3 years. Children like Henry don't just need general accommodations, they need targeted, individualized interventions that reflect how their brains work. Without them, they fall further behind. This lack of tailored support extends beyond the classroom. In his after-school program, Henry was recently suspended because he refused to enter a specific classroom. In his after-school program, oh, I said that already. Now we're left without after-school care for weeks until they figure out a plan for him. Henry has no alternatives. We have no alternatives inside as working parents. This disruption adds enormous stress to our family and isolates Henry even further. He has told us heartbreakingly that he doesn't have a sense of belonging. He expressed us wanting to die. He's 8 years old. In our desperation, we even considered Catholic school, despite it conflicting with some of our values. Yeah, even there, Henry was turned away because of his disabilities. This paints a stark picture of the state of our systems for children like him. There's exclusion at every turn, with families having to navigate an unresponsive and often harmful system of their own. My son deserves better. All children deserve better. Our system must do more than offer blanket solutions. They must provide individualized support, accountability, and inclusion in all spaces where children learn and grow. I urge you to advance policies and practices to look at the agency of education to create accountability systems for all the districts in our state. The systems are failing children like Henry. In our district alone, we have many, many families who are going through the same thing. And we're all burned out. We cannot navigate this anymore. But here we are, trying to speak every place that can give us a little public comment to see if there's some more that you can do for them. So this is me as a mom, and I urge you to support us. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I realize that was not easy. And I too have a child with a learning disability, and I can empathize certainly with parts of what you're talking about. So thank you. You are certainly welcome to include any comments for inclusion in the minutes. I'll leave that up to you, but you're always welcome to do that. Any other public comment? Not seeing any. The one final thing, as we had discussed at the beginning of the meeting, having a brief reflection at the end about how we did with the time limits and with Rich keeping score. I appreciate the emoji that you sent out with your 3-minute timer. So let me just do like thumbs up, thumbs down. If people liked having it timed. Did that help the meeting to sort of stay on track better? Okay. Thumbs down, anybody?
Jen, if I could just make one quick comment.
Sure.
I don't know if you noticed, but we're almost exactly on time for the meeting too. And I think everybody got to say their piece, and I think it worked well, but I think Kim's going to add to that or subtract from that.
Thanks. Kim?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it works as a both and. So I would say there needs to be pretty thoughtful planning around the agenda and where our role is in it. If it's not obvious, framing it so that we understand our responsibility. I know a lot of it is helpful information. A lot of the listen and learn information is in the universe of information that's out there. And a lot of the time on this agenda was not necessarily, within the scope of our legislated responsibility. So I would just say being very mindful to how we utilize our time, and then being, a time limit is helpful. And can be quicker and more efficient when I hit my little 3-minute thing. It's totally fine to do that. I think you would find if it weren't as a both and, it could feel that people aren't engaging as much as they are watching a clock. And I think that would be unfortunate for this work.
Yeah, and I think if we continue doing this, and I think, what I'm hearing is general consensus that this worked, so I'd like to continue doing it. But I think, as we get better at this, we will probably all develop our little internal clocks that will allow us so that we're not having to look, and just probably have a better sense of, keeping ourselves within sort of that embedded timeline clock, whatever.
Yeah, I think just importantly, being intentional about the work that is ours on these agendas as they're planned, knowing what's coming up. I'm sort of cataloging I've got the work plan for the VPIC and whatever. I'm going to share those resources. I'll share them with all. Nobody replied all. Hopefully we can take those up perhaps on a brief governance discussion, sort of as a swan song, maybe for Jenna and I, who've been around for 6 years and may have some thoughts.
All right, thanks. Mohammed, last comment.
Hi, Tim. Thank you for this reflection. I have some homework for everyone. I have noticed some pieces or parts of this meeting had been very heated, hot. Just to remind us as human beings and leaders not to take things personal. Whatever has been mentioned, I have been reflecting it already. And thinking is just a way to enhance our work together in serving really our schools and the children that go there every day. Some comments, questions may have been stated in a way maybe that could have been perceived by someone else. Oh, why are you taking it that way? I'm not going to name specifics. Just want to remind us whatsoever came out. I personally perceived some instances were really heated, and reflect on the content rather than taking it personal, and see it in the lens of enhancing us as a team in better serving our communities. If you have any questions for me, please. If not, thank you all again.
Thank you. I think that's a good way to end it. So if there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Kim.
Second.
Seconded by Rich. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we stand in adjournment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.